Chapter 376. Huayu, she said, interrupting Feng Jin's thoughts. Help me. Feng Jin's heart trembled. What do you need me for? Just tell me. Speaking of which, they were not only best friends. Lanting had saved his and his family's lives. I want to stay in Shangjing. As soon as she opened her mouth, Feng Jin said decisively, no, you should leave as soon as possible. He did not want his wife and daughter to be implicated. He had no choice but to choose a safer plan, but Jiang Pengji was different. It was good enough that she did not provoke bandits and mobs. Her safety was guaranteed. She had a high chance of leaving Shangjing for Chongzhou. Listen to me first. Go on, I'm listening. Feng Jin calmed his emotions. Jiang Pengji said, you saw it too. The emperor wants to give up on the people of Shangjing and choose to move the capital. The imperial guards are his lifeline. He won't let them go easily. We can't expect him to suddenly repent and become a king who loves the people like his own children. Huayu, have you thought about how the surviving people of Shangjing will live if we don't do anything? So, I want to stay and help them. If the Dongqing emperor wanted to move the capital, she would move the surviving people of Shangjing. Feng Jin sighed and poured cold water on her. Lanting, I know you are kind and virtuous, but you can't do it alone. What about the manpower needed to save the people? What about the food that the surviving people needed? What about the medicine needed to treat the wounded? That was only the most basic requirement. What about the dead people's bodies? It was summer and the corpses were rotting quickly. If they were not handled properly, it would lead to the spread of the plague. If the plague appeared, there would be a large number of patients. They did not have a doctor who could treat the plague. Most of the people in the world were fools. They were easily bewitched. Even if Jiang Pengji was dedicated to the people, there would always be people who liked to cause trouble. They could not wait for the food to be distributed, or they criticized her for not doing a good job. They liked to kill and rob. How could they be suppressed? Even if the above problems were solved, how would she settle the people who were saved? Shangjing was in ruins. The people were homeless. Even the emperor was troubled by this mess. She had the guts to take over? Feng Jin did not know what to say to her. Huayu, I can do it, Jiang Pengji said plainly. Feng Jin suppressed the inexplicable uneasiness in his heart. He looked sharply into Jiang Pengji's eyes. His voice was hoarse and his breathing was heavy. You're just a commoner, you can't shoulder such a huge responsibility. If you want to save him, you must take care of everything. Have you thought about how to end this? The emperor of Dongqing had given up on the people and chosen to move the capital. She, as a commoner, dared to go against him. She must be tired of living. I know how to end this. Jiang Pengji was as still as a mountain. Her expression did not change at all. Shangjing city is uninhabitable now. It will take a lot of energy and manpower to rebuild it. Based on the scale of this earthquake, it was likely that it would not only affect Shangyang County, but perhaps an entire province. There is no time to rebuild a home on top of the ruins. So, I want to move them to Chongzhou. As soon as he finished speaking, Feng Jin's expression changed drastically. He flipped the short table beside him. The short table flipped in the air and landed heavily on the ground with a clang, waking up Wei Jingxian and Changsheng who had just fallen asleep. Changsheng's weak cries were heard, her red and wrinkled little face was steaming, her cries sounded extremely aggrieved. Wei Jingxian lifted the curtain of the tent. She comforted the child while looking at the two of them in fear. Husband, Lanting. Did the two of them quarrel? Your husband is fine. Feng Jin was pulled back to reality. His cold expression turned into guilt. He said in a low voice, comfort Changsheng, there were aftershocks from time to time. Even adults were afraid, let alone a newborn child. As the father, he could not control his emotions and flipped the table, scaring the child to this extent. How could he not feel guilty and blame himself? Lanting, let's go somewhere further to talk. Feng Jin's expression returned to normal, but his tone was no longer gentle. It was more strict. Okay. Jiang Pengji stood up and followed him. The audience in the streaming room was frightened by the aura between the two of them. There was a gap in the bullet screen. Ingyang Kuaixian, how did the young Feng Jin suddenly become so scary? In an instant, he transformed from a gentle and noble son to a ferocious man. It scared the babies in the audience to death. Beef soup Bujia Jiang, could it be that the streamer said something taboo and guessed his sore spot? Lao Siji Lianmeng, tisk, worrying for nothing. Feng Jin's thoughts were actually quite easy to guess. The streamer did say something taboo. No matter which era it was, rebellion was not forbidden, right? The streamer just hinted that she did not want to put up with the stupid emperor of Dongqing anymore. She wanted to go on her own. The young Feng Jin received an orthodox education. It would be strange if he could accept it so quickly. Wuxia Guanxian, look at the Dongqing emperor. If he doesn't rebel, he will live through the Qing dynasty? Who's Jiaodan? Even so, there is no need to be so shocked, right? Look at Su Ku, his ability to accept is quite strong. Inuejia Zhuge Qinma, TSK, but the problem is, does the young Su Ku know that the streamer is a woman? When the bullet screen came out, countless ellipses appeared randomly, as if they did not realize the connection between them. So what if she is a woman? Did she eat your rice? After a long time, when the audience realized what it meant, they were suddenly speechless. The streamer was a reliable friend in the young Feng Jin's heart. If she was a man, she would naturally be able to show off her skills and plot for the world. After all, the Dongqing emperor was indeed stupid. If he rebelled, then so be it. But the problem was that she was a woman. Feng Jin probably did not have the concept of someone rebelling in his mind. After a while, one of the audience members told the truth. Nu Di Jiowa, why do I feel that? My baby Feng Jin was frightened by the streamer? Feng Jin was indeed frightened. His heart was full of complicated emotions. In the end, he accidentally flipped the short table. Lanting, why did you? Feng Jin's expression was indescribably conflicted. He knew that his best friend was restless and always caused trouble, but he did not expect her to be so ambitious. This is good. Jiang Pengji's expression was indifferent. She threw out an excuse. Can you imagine that one day, I will stay at home to take care of my husband and children? I will help a strange man wash his hands and cook his soup. I will be like a helpless little girl to him all day long, like a good wife and loving mother. Feng Jin looked like he had eaten a bug. He said with difficulty, you don't have to say any more. He lacked imagination. He could not imagine it at all. If there was a burly man who was like a helpless little girl to her, and if he felt wronged, he would punch her in the chest. That would be more normal. So, I can't live the life of an ordinary woman. Huayu, I can't be a coward for the rest of my life. I can't marry a woman to hide my identity and then live the rest of my life without thinking, Jiang Pengji said. I am a human first, then a woman. Since I am a human, why am I not qualified to be the emperor? The emperor is not benevolent, the court is not upright, and the country is on the verge of destruction. Why should I be content with an ordinary life? Chapter 377. Since ancient times, when did the sages rule that the emperor had to be a man? Even if there is such a rule, it is a rule. To be a monarch, one must be a human, not a man, and definitely not a beast. Jiang Pengji's words had a double meaning. She also scolded several emperors of Dongqing. Most of the people in Dongqing would agree if they said that they weren't humans but beasts. Feng Jin sighed. You have such a sharp tongue. When it comes to quibbling, I can't beat you. Indeed, the wise sages did not stipulate that the emperor had to be a man. On the other hand, why couldn't women do it? There was nothing wrong with this sentence. To the common people, they did not care who the emperor was. It did not matter if the emperor was a man, a woman, or a beast. They cared more about who could bring them a stable and happy life. Feng Jin was not an arrogant aristocrat. He understood what the common people needed. The ones who truly cared about the emperor's gender were probably not the common people, but the aristocratic families and other nobles. This is the current custom. Have you ever thought about what you would do if your identity was exposed? All the students in the world will write to condemn you. Feng Jin's heart wavered, but he still wanted to persuade her to give up. Jiang Pengji didn't hide it at all. She snorted and said, "The winner takes all." In the future, when he waved his army and chased after the deer, he would kill anyone who refused to submit. A scholar's scolding will be condemned by thousands of people. No matter how fiercely he scolds, it's just a verbal skill. Once the ears are blocked, who cares how he spits? Take life and death lightly, fight if you're not satisfied. It seemed that it was very powerful for scholars to criticize and criticize, but why would Jiang Pengji care about that? Because she didn't care about fame at all. If she died, why would she care about the flood behind her? If you want to blabber, then blabber. Whoever blabbered would be beaten up. Yes, when it came to such matters, she was just that simple and crude. There was nothing that could not be suppressed by absolute force. If there was, he would suppress it again. Feng Jin was silent. Jiang Pengji had said everything and laid her cards on the table. The atmosphere between the two of them was a little quiet. She could only take the initiative to attack. Will you help me or not? You've been drooling for so long. You should at least say something. It's very awkward for me to act alone. Feng Jin looked at her bitterly. Even if he wasn't being courteous, he should at least put on an act. Also, could he reconsider? Help. As soon as he finished speaking, Feng Jin wanted to slap himself. Why did he agree just now? It was as if he was possessed. He had previously advised Feng Ju not to act recklessly, but now he was slapped in the face. He was dragged into Jiang Pengji's boat in the blink of an eye, and it was a boat that could sink at any time. That's good. Jiang Pengji smiled. Feng Jin could not cry in his heart. However, he also knew in his heart that after moving the capital, Dongqing would not be far from falling apart. They didn't even care about the people in Shangjing, so why would they care about the people in other earthquake-stricken areas? Even a rabbit would bite when it was cornered, let alone a living person. After Feng Jin figured it out, he wasn't really against it anymore. Not to mention anything else, just for the sake of his wife and daughter, he had to find a place to settle down in order to protect his family. Jiang Pengji told him about the arrangement that she had told Su Ku. Feng Jin's worries were similar to what they had talked about before. At present, the four things they lacked the most were manpower, money, rice, and medicine. You should organize the people in the residence first. I will ask Xiaoyu to transfer the others over. In short, they had to first set up porridge stalls, organize manpower and the surviving citizens to clean up the ruins, and clear out a place to settle the wounded. The aftershocks haven't ended yet, so we have to ensure everyone's safety first. Feng Jin knew that Jiang Pengji was doing this for the sake of the people. There are only 26 people in Jin's residence, including the guards, maids, and servants. The warehouse has been cleared out, but there are still some meager assets. He pulled himself together and said, "These are secondary." Has Lanting ever thought that if you send troops without a good reason, you will be criticized by others and be suspected by the officials? Jiang Pengji already had a way to deal with this. If she used it properly, she might be able to get her a decent official position. I want to write a letter to express my feelings, so that I have a good reason to send troops. Jiang Pengji said, the emperor abandoned the people and moved the capital elsewhere. Who wouldn't feel guilty doing such a shameless thing? How will he enter the imperial mausoleum to meet his ancestors after 100 years? I think if I take the initiative to take on this matter and help the emperor cover up his shame, do you think he will be willing? I think not only will he be willing, but he will also be happy to see it happen. Everyone understood the logic. The key was that no one dared to stand up, but she dared. Feng Jin was silent, and his mouth was dry. He had to admit that the broad-mindedness and even foresight of the person in front of him were rare in the world. If I do well, the emperor will reward me generously and put the credit on my face to fool the people. If I don't do well, he can push all the blame on me and say that I did not do my job well. He will throw all the baseless accusations at me. No matter what, the emperor will not be at a disadvantage. This is the first point. Jiang Pengji was calm from beginning to end. This was what Feng Jin admired most about her. The second point is that after the capital is moved, the imperial capital will be far away from the three tribes of the northern borderline. The emperor will naturally not have sleepless nights, and Chongzhou will be less important to Dongqing. My existence as a hostage will not be as important as before. The emperor will allow me to stay. Good plan, Feng Jin said. It was a good plan, but in the eyes of others, the effort and gain were not comparable. Who would be willing to do that? I think so too. Jiang Pengji crossed her arms in front of her chest and giggled. Therefore, I will have to trouble Huayu to write the memorial for me. Feng Jin's expression froze. He was dumbfounded. The bullet screen in the streaming room was full of laughter, sweeping away the solemnity from before. Ingyang Kuaixian, no, my dear Feng Jin has not completely joined the streamer's pirate ship. Is it really good to reveal your true colors so soon? What if you scare him away? Don't be afraid, capture him. I still have to deal with the matter of money and rations. Xiaoyu is not by my side. Who else should I trouble if not you? Such a matter-of-fact tone made Feng Jin's hands itch. However, she said she could solve the problem of money and rations. It was not that Feng Jin did not believe Jiang Pengji, but he felt that it was a fantasy. Believe me. After Jiang Pengji finished speaking, her expression returned to its usual calmness. Submitting a petition to explain the situation had a high chance of success. Or rather, it was a done deal. The Dongqing emperor had been wary of Lu Shi for a long time. In the past, it was because of Hu County. Now, it was because he was the Chongzhou magistrate and was guarding the borders. If Jiang Pengji did well, the emperor could shamelessly steal the credit and minimize the impact of moving the capital and save some face. If Jiang Pengji did not do well, not only would she be tricked, but even Lu Shi would not be able to escape. His position as Chongzhou magistrate would be taken away. This was a huge gamble. In everyone's eyes, she would lose without a doubt. But it was also because of this that she wanted everyone's jaws to drop. System, if you are still alive, say something. Chapter 378. She came with ill intentions. Even if the system was just a bunch of data, it had been with Jiang Pengji for a few years and understood her temperament. Hearing her speak in such a tone, its heart skipped a beat and its nerves were completely tensed up. It deliberated for a while before responding, "What's the matter, host?" Jiang Pengji took advantage of the fact that there was no one around and found a flat spot to sit down. She placed her fingers together in a leisurely manner. Little did she know, the more she behaved like that, the more perturbed the system felt. Jiang Pengji said leisurely, "Do you remember that year when I asked you if popularity points could be exchanged for food during the snow disaster in Shangjing? You told me that my streaming room's level was not high enough. Even if it was high enough, 10,000 points could only be exchanged for a mere 50 kilograms of food. Is that right? The system was different from a living being. It had back-end data, so it was impossible for it to forget. Jiang Pengji had mentioned it in detail, so the system naturally could not pretend to be deaf and mute. Thinking of the scale of the earthquake, the system felt much more at ease. It could guess what Jiang Pengji wanted to say. Host, do you want to use popularity points to exchange for food? Since the streamer's streaming room has been upgraded to level 4, the exchange section can be opened. If you want to exchange for food, you can do it now. Huh. Greedy guy. Jiang Pengji lowered her eyes and hid the disdain in the depths of her eyes. She had not relented in the past, so how could she relent now? Apart from the 23 million popularity points she had accumulated, the remaining 33 million points in her back-end point account were the rewards from the livestream viewers for the earthquake. This figure was under the premise that the system had already divided half of the points. In other words, since the earthquake, the livestream viewers had gathered at least 66 million points. Jiang Pengji had tested the viewers before and knew the approximate prices on their side. 1 yuan of rewards was equivalent to 1 popularity point. The exchange rate given by the system was 10,000 points for 100 kilograms of food. What did that mean? It meant that 10,000 yuan could buy 100 kilograms of rice. The price of rice on the live stream side was different. The most common 20 kilograms of hardcover rice was about 50 yuan. Calculating the above ratio, it was obvious how black-hearted the system was. If it was under normal circumstances, Jiang Pengji could pretend to be blind and let the system embezzle her points for profit, considering that the system was still useful. Pigs could only be slaughtered after they were fattened. However, the rewards were used for disaster relief. Jiang Pengji had to keep her promise to the livestream viewers. Therefore, she could make a deal with the system, but the ratio had to be adjusted. Don't you think you're looting a burning house with 10,000 points for 50 kilograms of food? Jiang Pengji's mouth twitched. However, the system said, a transaction is a matter of mutual consent. How can you say that you're taking advantage of the situation? Jiang Pengji secretly twitched the corner of her mouth. She hadn't taught the system a lesson for the past few days, so it was getting cocky, wasn't it? She guessed that the system thought that she could only choose to trade with it if she wanted to exchange for food. That was why it was so stubborn. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue and intertwined her fingers together in boredom, as if she was absent-mindedly in a daze. Can't the ratio be adjusted? She asked. The system replied, no, this is the ratio that has been set since the beginning of production. Neither the host nor the system has the right to change it. Jiang Pengji heaved a long sigh in her heart. Some people always had the appearance of villains intoxicated by success. After suffering a calamity, they still refused to give up until they saw the Yellow River. It was really annoying. She did not continue to negotiate with the system. Her right index finger swiped through the air and pulled out her own attributes. The attributes panel became longer and longer, and the classification of various data became more detailed. Her gaze skipped over the meaningless content and directly locked onto basic strength, 51 points, strength fusion plus 67 points. When she left Shangjing with Master Yuanjing, she had fused her strength points once, and the system had also upgraded once. After that, she stayed in Langyi for half a year and did many trivial tasks and boring live broadcasts. She fused her strength points again, and the system also, coincidentally, upgraded. After about half an hour, the system took the initiative to ask, Host, do you want to exchange for food? Do you think I should exchange for food? She asked with a smile, but there was not a trace of emotion in her eyes. There was still 1,000-year-old ice condensed in her eyes. The system hesitated for a while and replied, according to the back-end calculation data of the system, it is recommended to exchange for food. The earthquake this time had a magnitude of 7.8, and there have been 5 aftershocks. In Shangjing alone, the the death toll is more than 30,000. Don't underestimate 30,000. There were about 120,000 ordinary people in Shangjing. Including the 100,000 imperial guards stationed there were about 220,000 people. Most of the imperial guards lived in military camps, so there were not many casualties after the earthquake. In other words, without counting the number of imperial guards, the death rate of the ordinary people in Shangjing had reached a quarter. This was only the confirmed dead. The number of people buried under the ruins who were still breathing was even greater. The system displayed the data, clearly telling Jiang Pengji that if she wanted to be a saint, she should not be distressed about the points. If she was distressed about the points, she should not continue to talk. So what if it took advantage of the situation? If she was unhappy, she could not exchange for food. It was not its fault that people died. Anyway, it had nothing to do with it. Hearing the implied meaning of the system, Jiang Pengji did not become angry from embarrassment. Instead, she revealed an inscrutable expression. The system thought that Jiang Pengji would admit defeat in the end, but not long after, it realized that something was wrong. She was too calm. Could it be that it could not hold it in? Jiang Pengji seemed to be talking about family matters. System, we have been bound for 3 to 4 years, but I don't think I have properly introduced myself. The system felt a little uncomfortable, but it could not tell what was wrong. It could only ask, didn't you introduce yourself? A long time ago, Jiang Pengji did not have a good relationship with the audience in the live streaming room. In order to diss the audience, she had introduced her background. I did introduce myself, but it was not comprehensive. Jiang Pengji seemed to have moved the topic away from exchanging for food, but the system became more and more uncomfortable. She said, now that I think about it, I should seriously introduce myself again. Name, Jiang Pengji. Occupation, Federal General. Gender, female. She is the commander of the 7th Army Corps. She holds 1/10 of the real power in the Federation. I know all this. The system looked patient, but in fact, it was already impatient. A hero does not boast about his past achievements. No, I haven't finished, Jiang Pengji said. There is a rigid requirement for the commander of the army. The system said casually, what the hell is the requirement? The development of the mental brain must reach at least the SSS level, Jiang Pengji replied calmly. However, to the system, this answer was tantamount to a sudden clap of thunder. It was as if a bomb had blown up its brain. The system did not respond. Jiang Pengji said again, scientists use scientific standards to classify the mental brain. From the lowest F to the highest SSS, there are a total of 21 levels. Every time one advances a level, the mental brain will be qualitatively improved. The higher the level, it does not mean that the IQ is higher, nor does it mean that the development of the brain is higher. It only means that the mental energy is higher. Why are you running? Before she finished speaking, a small source of energy seemed to be peeling from her brain. A pure mental strength firmly imprisoned it. Chapter 379. Jiang Pengji curled her lips mockingly and said, I haven't finished speaking. You're not giving me face at all. The system was silent. If it did not escape now, was it going to wait for death? If it was in a perfect state, of course, it would not be afraid of her. It was as if everyone's mental and brain domain was not 3S. If the mental and brain domain were to fight, no one would have an advantage if they fought with their lives on the line. However, the current itself could not be Jiang Pengji's opponent at all. Tisk, why do you think this is necessary? Jiang Pengji said in disdain. Her intertwined fingers returned to a state of interlocking. She still had a shrewd and confident look. I've already retreated again and again. I can't stand you courting death again and again. This time, you've really stepped on my bottom line. The system was silent. It tried to break through the mental confinement, but Jiang Pengji did not give it a chance to do so. After trying several times, not only did it not cause any damage to the mental confinement, but it also consumed a lot of energy. The system was too lazy to try anymore. It questioned Jiang Pengji coldly, from the beginning to the end, "Did you do it on purpose? Have you been fooling me for the past few years? You're too stupid and your IQ is too low, yet you want to blame society?" Jiang Pengji rolled her eyelids impatiently and rewarded it with a roll of her eyes. "If this time you had a discussion with me about the exchange rate and stepped on my bottom line, I wouldn't have shed all pretense of cordiality." The system was like a sheep. Every once in a while, it would keep on shedding some wool. Apart from that, it was indeed a little stupid, but it was easier to deal with such a stupid enemy in the open than hiding in the dark. "When did you start to doubt me?" The system had always known that Jiang Pengji did not have a good relationship with it. She even suspected it a few times, but the system did not care. It had been through so many hosts and had seen all kinds of people. There were many who were suspicious of it and guarded against it, just like Jiang Pengji. However, people's hearts were made of flesh. After a few years of getting along, which host would not trust it wholeheartedly? Therefore, with so many hosts as a lesson, the system changed its response to Jiang Pengji a little. To be more vulgar, it would advance when the enemy advanced and retreat when the enemy retreated. It would maintain a distance that was neither too far nor too close and use time to slowly wear away the alienation between the two. However, the tried and tested method did not work on her. Only now did he understand that the other party had never trusted him and had even watched his passionate performance as if he was watching a play. "Ever since you forced me to be reborn, I've hated it when people make decisions without asking for my opinion." The system was unconvinced. "I gave you a new life. Ungrateful. Who do you think you are? Does he have the right to show kindness to me? Who would want it?" Jiang Pengji did not even bother to lift her eyelids. This was like throwing a modern Sheng, the richest man in the world, into a prehistoric era where there was nothing. It was already good enough that he did not bear a grudge, yet he still hoped that the other party would be deeply grateful. If the other party was not grateful and did not trust him, then he was an ingrate. How could he be so thick-skinned? "Although you're shameless, ambitious, and greedy, I have to admit that you're still somewhat useful." Jiang Pengji said, "If it weren't for your help, my mental brain wouldn't have recovered so quickly. So, to prove that I'm not an ungrateful person, I'll take care of you. Don't worry." If the system's expression could be instantiated, it would probably be livid. "I'd rather be killed than humiliated. If you have the guts, kill me and get rid of future troubles. Otherwise, I'll have an eye for an eye." As the system's dignity and pride, how could it tolerate being trampled on by a lowly human? "I'm a woman, I have no guts. Only a fool would kill you. Do you think my IQ is as low as yours?" The system almost choked to death. It could not self-destruct because in Jiang Pengji's mental brain, she was God. It also could not escape. It was no match for her in a mental confrontation. It could not break through the mental shackles. Saying more would make it cry. Jiang Pengji laughed and hummed a light song. She reopened the system interface. For the former commander of the Federal Army, this kind of manual operation was nothing at all. All along, it had been its virtual consciousness that talked to Jiang Pengji. Strictly speaking, the so-called system was actually a virtual creature that was composed of its virtual consciousness and basic mechanical data. The basic mechanical data was the cold body, and its virtual consciousness gave the data consciousness. The body of the former was data, and the latter was the data consciousness born from the soil of data. The two were combined to form a virtual creature. In Jiang Pengji's era, interstellar science was already highly developed. The Federation's main brain was the first virtual creature. As a commander whose words carried weight, she did not read the confidential documents for nothing. Her fingers slid gently, and a very simple operation interface popped up. If the virtual market that the system showed her before was a giant interstellar supermarket, then what she saw now was a school canteen. Not only had the items changed, but the prices and exchange data had also changed. The interface data that the system showed her were all photoshopped. There were tens of thousands of pages of rice categories, but in reality, there was only one page. The price of rice was also very low. Even if the cross-dimensional transportation fee was included, the price was still cheaper than the hardcover rice in the streaming room. TSK, TSK, TSK. 10,000 points for 50 kilograms of food? Why don't you go to heaven? Even a profiteer would not be so black-hearted. Jiang Pengji looked through the system's contents in disgust. Her mind was carrying out complex data calculations and speculations. She raised her hand to search for medicinal herbs. There were more than 100 types, all of which were low-aged, common quality, and common types of medicinal herbs. As for the 1,000-year-old and 100-year-old ginseng, glossy Ganoderma, iceberg snow lotus, there was no trace of them at all. She then searched for the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting skill books that the system had enthusiastically recommended. The price had been reduced by 10 times. After clicking on each book, there was an additional large section of instruction manual on the introduction page. Jiang Pengji's stomach churned when she read it, and she almost vomited from disgust. Zither skills, advanced level, price, 100,000 points of popularity. Description: this skill has been refined by the 3rd generation host XXX, the 5th generation host YYY, the 6th generation host ZZZ. It has already reached the advanced level. After buying the skill book, one can obtain the soul fragments of several predecessors after learning it. One can learn it quickly. The first part was all nonsense, and the last part was the most horrifying. System, you were so good to your previous hosts. You exploited them when they were alive, made them work for free, and finally took back their souls to recycle and make use of them to create the so-called accelerated skill book. You really made the best use of everything. Jiang Pengji had just crossed over and it was difficult for her to write with a brush, so the system recommended this skill book to her. At that time, she did not trust the system. She did not care for such accelerated things, so she rejected it. Now that she looked back, her rejection was brilliant. The so-called accelerated skill book was nothing more than forcefully absorbing the soul fragments of an unknown number of people to achieve the accelerated effect. These soul fragments were all the soul fragments of the previous hosts of the system, and they were controlled by the system. Chapter 380. In the face of Jiang Pengji's reprimand, the system looked like a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water. It could not self-destruct or escape now. It could only hope to anger Jiang Pengji and make her destroy it. It had to admit that it had underestimated her. It had taken Jiang Pengji lightly because she was a lowly ant. If Jiang Pengji saw through its thoughts and said faintly, "This mental brain domain is your cage. When I catch your main body, I'll deal with all of you together. If I deal with you now, won't I alert the enemy?" Even if the system was just a virtual consciousness, it was frightened when it heard her say that. Are you stupid? Since my mental brain domain is at level 3S, do you think I can't see that your mental brain domain is abnormal? The system was speechless when it heard that. It was suddenly speechless. It had indeed sliced itself into two. The main body had most of the energy and abilities, and the part that was separated copied the incomplete data of the main body, forming another, palace intrigue streaming system, which was the self that was attached to Jiang Pengji. If I kill you, your main body will detect it immediately. This will alert the enemy. If I let you escape, the main body and the split body will merge, and the level of the mental brain domain will be the same as mine. Won't I create a strong enemy for no reason? Jiang Pengji did not understand. Who gave the system the confidence to think that she could not see through such childish tricks? You, be good and stay in the prison. I will feed you energy regularly. I guarantee that you won't starve to death or be full. After saying that, she cut off the channel of consciousness transmission from the system to the outside and isolated its noise. In an instant, she felt that the whole world was different. Her ears were completely quiet. Her battle with the system only took less than the time it took to burn a stick of incense. In the eyes of the audience in the streaming room, she was just distracted. Even though she did not have the assistance of the system and had to operate it manually, it was much safer without the hidden dangers of the system. At that moment, she realized that many functions in the background of the streaming room were grayed out. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue and brought up more detailed background data. With a glance, the system changed the initial data and set the sensitive words to completely prevent the possibility of the big shots from the other dimension finding her. If the audience made a forbidden comment, they would be kicked out immediately and their IP would be blocked. Therefore, Jiang Pengji could only meet the audience who were watching the show. Jiang Pengji couldn't see the content because of the system's concealment. Unfortunately, even if she imprisoned the system's consciousness, she did not have the authority to change the back-end data. In other words, the live stream would remain the same in the future, unable to level up, unable to update data, a severely emasculated version of the streaming room. TSK, Jiang Pengji felt disgusted. However, as long as the live broadcast room was still there, she could still see the audience, and she could still exchange for the rice that she needed at the mall. That was enough. He comforted himself in this way, but he still felt a little unhappy. However, his displeasure soon dissipated into thin air. Pfft, awesome. Jiang Pengji looked at the popularity points backstage. The total was 111 million. She quickly looked through the back-end data and finally understood where the tens of millions of popularity points had come from. Jiang Pengji put the system's consciousness under house arrest, and the points in its account were directly transferred to her back-end account. The ultimate reason for the system's attachment to her was unknown, but it had a very clear goal: to exploit the popularity points in a variety of ways. Every time it leveled up, the system would take the opportunity to transport the exploited popularity points to the main body. Of course, under Jiang Pengji's deliberate obstruction, the popularity points it could send to the main body were very few. Most of them were saved up by the system through hard work and frugality. The audience in the live stream enthusiastically rewarded the earthquake, and the system received half of the popularity points. They were all newly obtained, and they were still warm. The system did not have time to be secretly happy. It courted death and stepped on Jiang Pengji's bottom line. Both parties shed all pretenses of cordiality, and it was unfortunately placed under house arrest. In the end, the popularity points that the system had accumulated during this period all went into Jiang Pengji's pocket. At that moment, Ingyang Kuaixian, streamer, are you feeling unwell? Lo Siji Lianmeng, do you think the streamer is possessed? She was motionless from the beginning, and then she suddenly gestured at the air. Now she's smiling happily for no reason. Of course, maybe the wound on her back affected her brain. Jiang Pengji came back to her senses, and her expression became much gentler. She replied to the audience who were waiting anxiously. Host V, ahem, I'm sorry for making everyone wait. I just negotiated with the person in charge of the live stream. Because it's related to confidential issues, it's inconvenient to reveal too much. However, after my argument, the other party is willing to temporarily open a channel to another agricultural dimension. You can use rewards to exchange for an equivalent amount of food and medicinal herbs. However, in order not to affect the dimension, according to the rules between dimensions, the variety of items that can be exchanged is limited. The bullet screen this time was probably the most words that Jiang Pengji had ever spoken in one go. When the audience in the live stream heard the news, they were instantly excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Ingyang Kuaixian, damn, the streamer is actually an employee of the legendary mid-dimension streaming company? Just like what's written in novels. Waha, just listening to the streamer's words, I feel that it's very high-end and imposing. Motorola, oh my god, is there a streamer like the streamer? The audience in the live stream room had their imaginations run wild. They asked all kinds of questions, and Jiang Pengji replied to them all. Host V, I'm not an employee of any dimensional streaming company. I'm just an unlucky person who wandered in time and space. I was temporarily entrusted by someone to help support others. At first, I really didn't like live streaming. I still don't like live streaming after a few years, but I like you guys very much and I like the feeling of chatting with you guys live. As for whether there are other streamers, I'm not sure. So far, I only know that I'm one. After a brief chat, the audience in the live stream room slowly accepted this bitter truth. Yuejia Zhuge Qinma, streamer, the earthquake this time requires so many disaster relief materials and takes up a lot of space. How are you going to explain to outsiders where they came from? If you don't explain well, I feel that your friends around you will be suspicious. Being a dumb teammate had its advantages. You were full of flaws, and blind dumb teammates might not even notice that something was wrong. It was different to have a godly teammate. People who were too smart were not easy to deal with. Once they became suspicious, it would not be easy to dispel their suspicions. Jiang Pengji had naturally considered this problem. Host V, don't worry, sit and watch my performance. If I can't fool them, consider it my loss. Seeing this comment, for some reason, many viewers suddenly began to feel sorry for Su Ku and Feng Jin. She got up and flicked the dust off her hem. Chapter 381. Wei Jingxian was extremely sleepy. Her eyelids were heavy as if they were filled with lead water. Husband, in a daze, she found that there was a breath beside her. The alarm in her mind rang. She tried hard to open her eyes to see who that person was. The figure turned from blurry to clear. It turned out to be her husband, Feng Jin. Sleep first. I'll look at Chongsheng for a while. Feng Jin raised his hand to stop her from getting up. He pinched the corner of the quilt to prevent her from catching a cold. Husband, did you encounter a problem? Why are you frowning? Wei Jingxian turned to look at her daughter who was sleeping beside her. The newborn child's face was red and wrinkled. She was not good-looking. However, the midwife who had seen her said that she was very beautiful. After a few days, her face would be white and tender. She would look beautiful. Just now, I promised to help Lanting. Feng Jin could not help but bend his fingers to touch the child's face. The soft touch made his heart palpitate. He was even more determined in his heart. Wei Jingxian did not understand. Was it not normal for friends to help each other? However, her husband's expression clearly told her that this help might have another meaning. The earth is turning upside down, the country is unstable. The government has the intention to move the capital to another place, abandoning the people. Wei Jingxian frowned. When she heard the second half of the sentence, she could not help but tighten her grip under the quilt. Although she was a woman in the inner courtyard, she was born in an aristocratic family. Feng Jin often talked with her, so her knowledge was not comparable to that of ordinary women. Move the capital? She opened her eyes wide, and her sleepiness was gone. If so, do you have any plans? You have just given birth and Chongsheng is still young. Both of you can't stand the turbulence. Naturally, it is better to be safe. Don't worry, I will arrange everything. Jingxian only needs to take care of her body slowly. Only when you and your daughter are healthy will my plan be worthwhile. Wei Jingxian stretched her right hand out of the quilt and held his hand on his knee. Feng Jin held it back and said gently, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." At this time, Changsheng, who was still sleeping soundly, moved her little fist on the side of her head. Feng Jin saw this and the smile on his face became brighter. Yes, father forgot to count you in. He poked the little guy's clenched fist with his finger. The little guy frowned in disdain. Don't disturb her. If she wakes up and cries, you'll have to serve her. Wei Jingxian glared at him angrily. Even the corners of her eyes carried a mature charm. Feng Jin felt a little more relaxed. Even the booklet in his sleeve did not burn his hand. He knew that once this memorial reached the heavens, he, Feng Huaiyu, would be tied to Lu Shi for the rest of his life. The young lady of the Feng clan has always been strong-willed. As he spoke, he couldn't help but poke his daughter's clenched fist. Miss, sigh, looking at her daughter's sleeping face, Wei Jingxian suddenly understood what her mother had said before she got married. To raise a son for 100 years is to worry for 99. This world was becoming harsher and harsher for women. It was hard to survive. Who knew what would happen in another 10 years? What is Jingxian thinking about? Wei Jingxian recalled, I'm thinking about what happened before I got married, why don't you tell me? It's not very interesting. Wei Jingxian said, when I was young, I could ride a horse on the street. But when I grew older, I had to stay in the boudoir. I had to practice calligraphy every day and had less time to play outside. A while ago, I received a letter from a friend in the boudoir. I heard her complain. I couldn't help but worry. Would Changsheng not be able to leave the house in another 10 years? She would even be criticized when she goes out. Feng Jin's attention was attracted by her words. He temporarily put aside the matter of the booklet. What do you mean? Wei Jingxian said, the Empress of Zhongzhou is brilliant in literature and has a great ambition to enlighten all the women in the world. These years of painstaking study, she has written 4 books in succession, namely, Women's Commandments, Women's Internal Instructions, Women's Analects, and Women's Exemplary Records. These 4 books are highly regarded by the Confucian scholars of Zhongzhou and a large number of students. They are also known as the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women. They are popular in Zhongzhou and sought after by the noble ladies of the gentry. Now, even the noble ladies of Hejin County have a copy. These books were obviously read by women. Feng Jin naturally wouldn't touch them. He said suspiciously, they are written by the virtuous Empress and are highly regarded by the Confucian scholars. I think they are good reading materials. Why is Jingxian a little unhappy? It was hard to say about other things, but that Women's Analects dared to use the 2 words Analects in it. It should be very solid. In the future, I will buy a few books for Changsheng to read as enlightenment reading materials. Feng Jin thought to himself. Then, he realized that Jingxian was looking at him strangely. Have you read these 4 books? Wei Jingxian looked at her daughter and then at her husband. This was not a joke. I've never heard of them. Why would he read women's boudoir books? He wasn't a pervert. Then it's better for you to take some time to read them. Wei Jingxian thought of Sheng Wanwan's tearful complaints to her and her heart ached. She was the favored daughter of the Shengwan family, but now she was being treated like this. She couldn't help but sigh. Feng Jin's heart tightened. He had a vague sense of foreboding, but he still remembered what she said. The couple talked for a while in the tent until Wei Jingxian was exhausted and fell asleep. Only then did he lift the curtain of the tent and leave. He carefully closed the curtains to prevent the cold wind from blowing in. Feng Ju shouted, "Second brother. Do you have an idea about what happened previously?" Feng Jin's eyes flashed and he said, "I've made up my mind." "What about you?" Although Feng Ju was a 16-year-old boy, he was only a high school student in the era of the live streaming room. But in this era, he was already a man who could bear the rise and fall of a family. As his elder brother, Feng Jin had no right to interfere with his choice and ambition. The two brothers might not be on the same path anymore. I'm all alone now. I have no family to tie me down, so I want to go out and fight and see the world. After saying that, Feng Ju looked away unnaturally, not daring to meet his elder brother's eyes. Feng Jin said, "You want to look for Huang Song?" This was not a question, but a statement. Yes. Feng Ju nodded. A gentleman hides his weapon and waits for the right time. That's all I have to say. Feng Jin was worried about Huang Song, but his younger brother was stubborn and he could not control him. Then, what about you? Feng Ju secretly heaved a sigh of relief and turned to Feng Jin. Your sister-in-law and niece should not be tired from the long journey. They will stay in Shangjing for the time being and observe the situation, Feng Jin said in a low voice. Lanting has the ambition to save the world and the people. He can't bear to see the people destitute and homeless. He plans to petition for the welfare of the people who died in the earthquake. After hearing this, Feng Ju did not come back to his senses for a long time. Did his elder brother mean that he planned to stay and help Lu Shi? Didn't his elder brother say that Lu Shi did not have that ambition? He wanted to ask more, but when he saw his elder brother's pale and tired face, Feng Ju swallowed the words on the tip of his tongue. As they were talking, the main character, Jiang Pengji, arrived. Have you finished writing the memorial? Yes. Take a look at what's wrong. Feng Jin took out the memorial from his sleeve and handed it to her. Jiang Pengji took it and looked at it carefully. She said, Huayu, I naturally trust your literary talent. When she finished reading, she raised her head and looked at Feng Jin. He was also staring at her silently. Chapter 382. The audience in the streaming room craned their necks and widened their eyes to see the contents of the booklet. However, it was difficult for them to read traditional Chinese and classical Chinese. It took them a long time to figure out what Feng Jin had written. After a while, they still did not understand why the two of them suddenly looked at each other in silence. They could only pretend to comment vaguely. Ingyang Kuaixian, Young Feng Jin's handwriting is really nice. There are no typos. Linglong Mibao #despise. Even if he wrote wrongly, you wouldn't be able to recognize his handwriting, would you? Sans Hisongxuningsher, is there anyone in the streaming room who can explain? I'm so confused. I don't understand at all. It turns out that there are all kinds of birds in a big forest, and there are many great people who can dive. Wikai Guofengxiu, Feng Jin's booklet is not difficult to understand. The streamer asked Feng Jin to write a booklet for her to petition and take on the task of disaster relief. The content of Feng Jin's booklet was roughly the same, but the details were different. He added, extortion and blackmail. Extortion and blackmail? Everyone looked at the 4 words and was suddenly stunned. Guikai Guofengxiu, #picknose. Learn well. Children who cry get milk. He described the tragic scene after the earthquake and wrote about the people's misery to gain sympathy. Then he tearfully expressed his loyalty, hoping to use his meager power to help the people and show the emperor's benevolence. In the end, he complained about being poor, saying that he was born in a gentry family and had the ambition to serve the country, but he did not have an official title and felt that his status was not enough. TSK, one had to say that there were enough emotional scenes and the flattery was just right. Young Feng Jin was not as old-fashioned and pedantic as he had imagined. Tudu Feichio, I wanted to criticize the ID above, but since you analyzed it so well, I'll bear with it. Guikai Guofengxiu, thanks to my university major, I have no difficulty reading traditional Chinese and classical Chinese. Lo Siji Lianmeng, birds of a feather flock together. Those who could fool around with the streamer would naturally have similar personalities. Jiang Pengji originally only wanted to petition and have a good reason to do so. Feng Jin's writing was very likely to help her fight for an official position. Now the people are in a panic and everyone is in danger. If the emperor knew about your sincerity, he would naturally feel that it is rare to have a good official. Humans were most afraid of comparison. After comparison, the better, the worse the worse. If she had a little luck, the emperor would be overjoyed and would definitely give her an official title. Even if it was just an empty title without any real power, it was still better than an empty title. It's an unexpected surprise. Huayu, you're really talented. Jiang Pengji did not hide it. If that's the case, I'll give you a surprise too. Feng Jin's eyes lit up. The surprise she mentioned, could it be, yes? Due to the presence of Feng Ju, she only blinked and nodded, giving Feng Jin an affirmative answer. This booklet has to be sent up as soon as possible. On the other hand, thanks to Su Ke's proficiency in internal affairs, he did not panic. He organized his men, set up a gruel stall, and hired the young and strong people who were lucky enough to survive. Some of them cleaned up the ruins and cleared up the empty space, while the others were divided into several teams to look for survivors. The earthquake was severe, and the ground collapsed or protruded. The road surface was uneven, and the degree of damage was serious, which made the rescue extremely difficult. Because the earthquake occurred in the middle of the night, most people were already asleep. Therefore, many people were buried in the ruins. Some died on the spot, while some were lucky enough to survive. Although they were alive, most of them were seriously injured. If they were not treated, they would not live for more than a few days. There was a serious shortage of manpower. Jiang Pengji had solved the shortage of food and medicinal herbs, but she could not solve the problem of manpower. She had no choice but to find a strong man. She even went to the field herself. Xiaoyu, bring some people to set up the injured area. Jiang Pengji was very clear that it was a tough battle this time. It was a race against time and a fight for survival with the King of Hell. She quickly arranged tasks. Huayu, help settle down the injured and the gruel stall. You can also take care of Jingxian nearby. In ancient times, scholars had to learn the 6 arts of a gentleman. They could ride, shoot, or dance with the sword. However, they were still civil servants. Jiang Pengji did not let them go to the ruins for search and rescue, lest they were unlucky enough to die in an aftershock. It was safer to stay in the base camp. After she finished speaking, Jiang Pengji took the sleeves that Takshu handed to her. She bit one end of the rope roughly and tied the sleeves nimbly with the other end. Then, she swiftly tied a slipknot on both ends of the rope, revealing a pair of snow-white, muscular arms for the convenience of search and rescue. Takshu, stay here to make stretchers and take care of the injured people. Their luck was not too bad. All the servants of the Lu residence had survived. Coincidentally, there was a servant girl who had learned medical skills from the doctor's father. Although she had only learned superficial knowledge, how could she be picky? She directly let the girl be a doctor. She might not be able to treat serious injuries, but she could still treat ordinary injuries. The search and rescue started from the nearest place. Jiang Pengji basically rushed to the front, letting the people who followed behind know what it meant to be born with divine strength. Not long after, they were covered in dust and blood. The original color of their clothes could not be discerned. Jiang Pengji was skilled and strong. Her 5 senses were strong. In addition, she had a strong spirit that ordinary people did not have. She was equivalent to a mobile human search and rescue device. She could find traces of life. Based on the principle of prioritizing rescue, of course, she would first save those with strong signs of life. Bring the stretcher over. There are living people here. Jiang Pengji calculated the collapsed wooden and stone structure. She used both hands to lift the rubble, revealing a figure covered in blood. The wood was ready-made. It was directly taken from the ruins. Jiang Pengji asked people to gather all the furs and cloth that could be found. She asked the weaker servant girls to make a simple stretcher together. It did not matter if it looked good or not. It was convenient to put the injured on the stretcher. Immediately, someone came up from behind and worked together to carry the person out and put him on the stretcher. Jiang Pengji roughly explained to them the points to pay attention to when carrying the person, so as not to accidentally aggravate the injury. Seeing Jiang Pengji save one person after another who was still alive, everyone thought that there were many survivors. In fact, only Jiang Pengji frowned deeply. Her heart sank to the bottom. Too many people had died, there was no time to lament about this. Jiang Pengji could only purse her lips and bear the scorching sun above her head. Soon, bloody blisters appeared on her hands. The bloody blisters burst, mixed with sand and wooden thorns. Her palms looked very scary. The streaming room was quiet. The atmosphere was heavy. No one dared to speak. From a seismological point of view, 72 hours after an earthquake was the golden time for search and rescue. Jiang Pengji had already wasted a lot of time before. Now she had to seize every minute and second. After 6 hours, it was already noon. The scorching sun was the hottest time. There were 230 people rescued alive. Among them, 190 were rescued by the team led by Jiang Pengji. There were only a few living people carried out by the other teams. Most of them were cold and stiff corpses. The area that was tidied up was filled with the strong smell of blood. Chapter 383. Jiang Pengji rubbed her feet on the ground. Then, she randomly picked up a tree branch and drew an irregular rectangle on the ground. With a few strokes, she drew a regional map of Shangjing. During her time in Shangjing, she basically wandered around aimlessly outside. She knew the regional plan very well. It would not work if they kept squeezing into one area for the search and rescue. It would only waste time. Most of the areas outside could not be taken care of. Including the available personnel from the 2 residences and the young men hired, the entire search and rescue team had 71 people. She already had a plan in her mind on how to maximize the efficiency of these people. There are still too few people. Feng Jin's face was pale. There were only a few dozen people. They could not even cover the eastern part of the city. We'll do our best and leave the rest to fate. If the appointment from the government came this morning, it might be easier to give some people symbolically. Su Ku was also panting from exhaustion. But when he saw that Jiang Pengji's lips were dry and pale, her sweat had soaked her clothes several times, and there was not a single part of her hands that was unharmed, he did not dare to make a sound no matter how tired he was. He swallowed his words back into his stomach. It will be night in another 6 to 8 hours. This is the tricky part, Jiang Pengji's voice was hoarse. She spoke of the difficult problem that the 2 beside her could not bear to speak of. The lighting facilities in ancient times were too backward. The rich could use candles to make fire, the slightly poorer used oil lamps, and the poor would wash up and sleep at night. It was conceivable that after an earthquake, there would be a huge impact on the search and rescue if there were no lighting facilities at night. It could be said that apart from Jiang Pengji, the others were basically useless. The only thing to be thankful for was that it was summer and the sky would turn dark later. Feng Jin said, "We have to save them even if we have to hold candles. Human life is as important as the sky. How can mere candles compare to it? Rich families needed candles a lot. Therefore, the candles found in the storerooms of the 2 residences could barely make up a box. It was estimated that it could last for 1 night. However, how could the light of candles compare to the blazing sun? It would definitely bring great inconvenience to the rescue." Jiang Pengji raised her hand to rub between her eyebrows. She did not know how many bloody blisters had formed on her palm and how many had burst. Others felt that her hand was in pain just by looking at it. She was indifferent, as if she could not feel the pain. Let's call it a day. Arrange for people to take turns to rest. We still have work to do at night. There were only so many people, and not everyone was as tireless as she was. They could not withstand the high-intensity search and rescue that lasted day and night. Jiang Pengji missed her troops again. After all, they were well-trained and had much stronger stamina than ordinary people. I'm thinking how good it would be if the troops could land now. She smiled bitterly and took a bowl of warm water from Takshu. She raised her head and poured it into her mouth. She gulped it down and felt that it was not enough, so she asked Takshu to get her another bowl. If that's the case, Lang Jun, then I wish I had the ability to turn beans into soldiers. Su Ku tried to find joy in his misery. He held a bowl of porridge and gulped it down. He no longer cared about his gentlemanly demeanor. Feng Jin sighed and ate a simple bowl of porridge. His stomach was half full. Jin will go and take a look at Madame. Now, he was most concerned about his wife and daughter. Jiang Pengji gave up her own carriage. It was spacious inside and everything was in order. In addition, the shock absorption system was good. As long as there was a thick mattress and quilt, even if there was an aftershock, Wei Jingxian would not feel a strong tremor while lying in the carriage. Since she was pregnant and needed to breastfeed the child, it was natural to give her a special treatment. The food in the mouth was to restore vitality and stimulate the production of breast milk. No one could let the mother and daughter go hungry. Because there were too many injured, almost all of them were bloody. The air was filled with a strong smell of blood. The pregnant woman could not stand such stimulation. The carriage was tightly packed and it was too stuffy. She asked the maid to soak a cloth with warm water and tighten it to wipe her sweat. Only then could she feel a little better. Thinking of the poor conditions, Feng Jin only felt guilty. I can't eat it. Do you want to eat some too? Feng Jin entered the carriage and tidied up his appearance. He wiped his hands and the skin that was exposed outside. He also changed the clothes that covered his head so that he would not dirty the carriage. As soon as the curtain was lifted, the heat inside came out. Just staying for a while made him feel uncomfortable and sweaty. No, I ate just now. You're still in confinement and need to nourish yourself so that you don't get sick in the future. Feng Jin sighed and turned his gaze to his daughter. Because of the high temperature in the carriage, the swaddling clothes that were wrapped outside had been untied. She wore 2 small cotton clothes and a small quilt. It's a little hot inside. Open the curtain at intervals to get some air so that you don't feel stuffy, Feng Jin said. Wei Jingxian said, I remember. You did a good job as a maid. When you get some air, cover yourself and the child well so that you don't catch a cold, Feng Jin could not help but remind her. Wei Jingxian listened patiently. The relationship between the husband and wife could be said to be advancing by leaps and bounds. Jiang Pengji's memorial was quickly sent to the imperial summer village outside the city. After the earthquake, the imperial summer village was on high alert. There were imperial guards both inside and outside the village. The memorial was successfully delivered to the emperor's hands after a series of twists and turns. The imperial summer village was different from ordinary buildings. Generally, it had to be earthquake-proof. Therefore, even after the strong earthquake last night, the palace did not collapse seriously. It was only for the sake of the emperor's life that a huge, luxurious tent was built outside. Although it was a tent, it was actually not much different from the imperial summer village. Inside, there was still the emperor's office, the study room for meeting the ministers, a place for bathing, washing, and toilet. There was also a huge dragon bed for the concubines. The interior was extremely luxurious. One could not tell that it was a temporary tent from the inside. One would think that it was a luxuriously decorated palace room. The people of ancient times could not explain the cause of the earthquake, so they used their imagination to forcibly explain it. One of the most widespread explanations was the earth dragon turning over. Therefore, every earthquake could be interpreted as a warning and dissatisfaction from the heavens towards the emperor. This was also what the emperor hated the most. Since the earthquake last night, the emperor had been in a bad mood. When he could not hold back his anger, he even drew his sword and killed a few court officials who tried to sway the hearts of the people. On the chaise lounge behind the screen, there was a peerlessly beautiful woman. She opened her eyes slightly and got off the couch barefooted. Her feet stepped on the delicate and soft animal skin carpet. She only had a transparent white robe embroidered with 100 birds paying homage to the phoenix draped loosely over her body. Other than that, there was not a single piece of clothing to cover her body. Her long hair was loose and hung on both sides of her chest, faintly covering 2 dark red spots. Her snow-white skin was covered with ambiguous bruises. Some were deep, some were light, and the traces of old and new were obvious. It did not look like it had been done in a short period of time. It looked like it had been done continuously for a few days. Her steps were light and graceful. Her 2 straight long legs made one's heart sway. One could not help but linger on her chest and triangular area. The woman pulled up her sleeves. Her face was enchanting. Her body was curvy and her full red lips were curled into a seductive arc. She was like a beautiful peony in full bloom. Chapter 384. June, you're awake? Come to me. The emperor had just chopped off the head of a courtier with his sword in a rage. The headless body collapsed on the ground, and the head rolled to the woman's fair and almost transparent jade feet. She raised her eyes and stepped over the head. The soles of her feet were stained with sticky blood that was still warm. As she moved with light steps, small bloody footprints were left on the ground. Has someone made you unhappy again? The woman did not comply with the emperor's words. Instead, she had an enchanting smile on her face. Her full red lips made one's throat feel hot. Her delicate body was lying on the chaise lounge not far from the dragon table. Her large sleeves were loosely pulled back to her elbows, revealing her flawless shoulders that were as white jade. She swung her feet. Her jade-like feet couldn't even be held by a single hand. The blood on the soles of her feet made her skin look even whiter. A natural stunner. Countless beautiful scenes flashed through the emperor's mind. The ecstasy of the recovery made his body feel something. He wanted to hold the stunner in front of him in his arms and love her fiercely. He could not remember how many years it had been since he had such a young and impulsive feeling. As he grew older, he became more and more powerless. His temper became more and more irritable. He often abused the beauties around him to obtain pleasure. That was until he met Huijun, the peerless stunner. Huiyun, he could feel the heart-wrenching pain and humiliation as well as the strong love that could not be erased. The love and hate intertwined and made him lose his mind. The emperor did not ask who she was. He directly used force to have sex with her in the cool garden of the imperial summer manor. Similar faces, similar names, but completely different feelings. If Huiyun was said to be a delicate and pure white lotus that was untainted by mud, then Huijun was a flower of hell that was born from raging flames. She was extremely coquettish and gorgeous, and she was like a seductive demoness that would immediately cause one to become addicted to her and find it difficult to quit. Both of them had enchanting bodies, but Huiyun was naturally shy. She always made him feel uncomfortable during sex. Sometimes, he had to take care of her body and had no choice but to endure it. However, this woman called Huijun was different. She was as passionate as fire, bold and charming. The emperor always felt that his blood was boiling and his whole body was comfortable. He had regained the impulsiveness and enthusiasm of a young boy. He had feelings for Huiyun. She was the bright moon that he could not reach. She brought him happiness, but also pain and humiliation. As for Huijun, when he interacted with her, he felt as if he had been reborn. Countless pleasures caused him to savor the taste of the marrow, and he was unable to leave. The former could not be separated from the spirit, the latter could not be separated from the body. For this emperor who thought with his lower body, physical enjoyment was more important than spiritual enjoyment. Of course, he only found out that Huijun was actually his fourth son's beloved concubine. When he thought of Huijun and Huiyun's similar appearance and similar names, and that Wang Huiyun was the birth mother of the fourth prince, Wu Majun, and the former imperial concubine of the emperor suddenly felt disgusted, as if he had eaten a fly. His dislike for Wu Majun deepened. Thinking of this, the emperor did not feel the slightest bit guilty for snatching his son's beloved concubine. He ordered people to secretly investigate Huijun's identity. He dispelled his doubts and doted on this woman to the bone. However, she was not a harmless white lotus, but a prickly rose. She was proud and willful. The emperor saw that Huijun was ignoring him. Instead, he smiled and stepped forward. He raised his hand to hold her jade foot and sniffed it with an infatuated expression. Smelling it, his whole body felt comfortable. How can your body be stained with the blood of a foreign man? I'll clean it for you. Huijun looked coldly at the old man who was half kneeling in front of her and holding her jade foot and licking it. She felt disgusted. Unhappy, she raised her foot and pressed it against his face. Not only was the emperor not angry, but he also smiled and licked her foot. His two hands touched her calf. Both father and son were masochistic perverts. She retracted her foot and sneered angrily, "You don't think it's dirty? Jun's body is clean everywhere. How is it dirty?" The emperor slowly got up. His eyes were filled with strong aggression. He scanned her body. There seemed to be two clusters of flames burning in his eyes. "I am your son's concubine. I gave my body to him first. Do you think it's clean?" The emperor sneered coldly, "You are mine now. You can't think about other men." So what if she was his son's concubine? He had even slept with his brother, the wife and concubine of the former emperor. No matter what kind of woman she was, her careful and vicious nature would never change. In order to save her life, the former emperor's empress had secretly climbed into his bed. She had even taken the initiative to send Wang Guifei to his bed. Now, Liu Shi's daughter, Liu Huan, had sent Huijun to his bed for the sake of the status of the fourth princess consort. Moreover, if it wasn't for the fourth princess consort's scheme to push you to my side, I wouldn't be able to have you, right? The emperor hugged the beauty in his arms and said faintly, "How can I not have a taste of a peerless beauty who is sent to my door? I love your little mouth very much." As he spoke, he lowered his head and nibbled. Huijun secretly twitched her mouth. She had thought that the royal family was very honorable. Only after truly interacting with them did she realize how disgusting it was. The emperor in front of her, other than having money and status, was not as good as the guests she had met before. At least those guests had clearly come to visit. Not only did the emperor want to visit, but he also wanted her to fall in love with them. How shameless. The two of them were panting. The emperor carried her to sit in front of the dragon desk. He had to take her with him to read the memorials. Huijun was originally half-squinting lazily. She secretly glanced at the memorials and found a familiar name on one of the memorials. Coincidentally, the emperor had also seen the memorials. He skimmed through them. His eyes were dark and gloomy. Occasionally, there was a murderous glint. What is this? Huijun did not look at the memorials. Instead, she raised her hand and took the other memorials. After looking at them, she threw them to the side. She looked at them and threw them all over the floor. Her willfulness was a clear indication of her unparalleled pampering. A bunch of useless things. My head hurts just looking at them. The emperor allowed her to throw a tantrum until she took away the memorials in his hands. The handwriting is nice. Huijun glanced at it. She seemed to be attracted by the handwriting and became interested. Sir, please read it to me. It was not a request, but a statement of an order. All right, I will read it to you. The emperor smiled indulgently. He opened the memorials with one hand and took advantage of her with the other. After reading it, Huijun said, "What a pedantic scholar. However, he is better than those who annoy the emperor." The emperor said, "This was written by your former boss, Lang Jun." Huijun's eyes widened in shock. She immediately thought of something. She snorted and turned her face away. "What is it now, my little ancestor? I am trying to avoid arousing suspicion." The emperor laughed and said, "Lu Shi is indeed talented. He is also patriotic and loyal to the emperor. How can I neglect such a talent? Jun said that I will give him whatever official position he deserves." Huijun secretly thought of something and smiled charmingly. "Why don't you give it to any county magistrate?" The emperor suddenly sneered and hugged Huijun tightly. He sighed and said, "I like Jun very much." He waved his pen and appointed Lu Shi as the magistrate of Xiangyang district. When the earthquake passed and the people's livelihood was restored, he would immediately take office. Chapter 385. The emperor was happy to see someone take the blame. He originally wanted to give him a title, but now he gave him the position of the magistrate of Xiangyang district. Although Xiangyang district was not rich, it had a vast land. It was just that it was remote and uninhabited. In order to cover up his embarrassment, the emperor specially allocated 500 dawn of grain and 1,000 imperial guards. He ordered his trusted aide, Huang Tan, to announce the edict. Huang Tan was Huang Song's godfather. Huang Tan sat down and massaged his cold legs. He lamented, "I have to admit that I'm old. The young ones today are really impressive." The earth turned upside down, Shangjing was almost in ruins. The emperor killed an important official in a fit of rage. No one dared to take over this hot potato. Lu Shi's son had the guts to recommend himself. This seemed to be a narrow escape, but at the same time it was a huge opportunity. He thought of his grandson and reminded him, "You should be more alert. Don't cause trouble everywhere." Huang Song rarely had time to rest, but he was lectured by his godfather. He could not help but put on a bitter face. He had a sweet mouth and was not afraid of Huang Tan's years of prestige. He immediately thought of a way to divert Huang Tan's attention. Huang Song got up and massaged Huang Tan's shoulders. He said with a cheeky smile, "From what I see, I'm not old. Those young boys are impatient and have no sense of propriety. How can they compare to me? My contributions to the country and the country are unparalleled." Although this was a bootlicking, Huang Tan had indeed protected many loyal and virtuous officials. It was not that he had a conscience. He was just trying to please both sides. Jiang Pengji was lucky this time. She met Huang Tan, who brought people to announce the edict. If it were other eunuchs, things would not be so simple. There were many tricks. If the eunuch in charge of announcing the imperial edict found Jiang Pengji an eyesore or was greedy by nature and wanted to sabotage her secretly, he would definitely choose the old rice. If he was more black-hearted, he would directly replace it with rice bran. The 1,000 imperial guards could also be replaced by those who were physically weak, violent, and disobedient. Huang Tan liked to be on good terms with the gentry and young people with potential. He would not play tricks in this area. Only your mouth is sweet. I haven't settled down yet, so it doesn't matter. I can't be like this when I marry Mr. G's beloved daughter in a few days. Mr. G was Huang Song's teacher and also a prestigious scholar in Dongqing. Grandson understands. I will definitely not disappoint grandfather's painstaking efforts. After a while, Huang Tan tidied up his clothes and prepared to bring people to announce the imperial edict. At this moment, the golden crow fell from the west. Along with the passage of time, the curtain of night grew darker, and his line of sight gradually blurred. When the last ray of light disappeared from the horizon, the entire land was shrouded in darkness. Shangjing City, which was usually brightly lit, was now pitch black and silent. The warm wind carried the lingering heat through the walls and alleys, bringing with it a rustling sound. From afar, it sounded like the wailing of a wronged soul, making one's hair stand on end. After a day of searching, the number of survivors found had already reached 512, and the search and rescue team had expanded to 123. As for the ice-cold corpses that were carried out from the ruins, there were at least 2,000 to 3,000 of them. They were densely piled up into a pile, causing people's hair to stand on end. This number, for the once prosperous Shangjing City, was really insignificant. It was just a drop in the ocean. Among them, most of the people who survived were injured. Some of their injuries were light, only their arms or legs were injured. Some of their injuries were very serious, with a high fever that did not subside. They were delirious and hovering on the edge of life and death. The maidservants from the 2 residences and the rescued women and children volunteered to take care of the injured. Xiaoyu, bring some people to this place to collect rations at night. Move stealthily. Jiang Pengji passed a map to Su Ku. This matter should be done by herself, but she was the only one who could search and rescue at night. The efficiency of the others was too low. Rather than that, it was better to send some people to collect rations to temporarily alleviate the food shortage and stabilize the people's hearts. Feng Jin saw that Su Ku was so tired that his face was pale and his eyes were still green. He said, "Why don't you leave this matter to me?" "No need. Huayu, you stay here and take charge. I can still handle it." Su Ku composed himself. He knew that Feng Jin did not have much rest during this period of time. He was tormented by his wife's labor, and then there was the earthquake. He did not sleep at all. He was alone now. His wife, Xuanmei, was far away in Hejian County. Feng Jin was tied down by his family and could not leave his wife and daughter at will. It seemed that he was the most suitable person to handle this matter. 20 hours had passed since the earthquake. Jiang Pengji did not know how many survivors there were in the entire Shangjing City and how many people had died in the long wait. All she could do was to search for the survivors from the ruins and send them for treatment. Jiang Pengji held a simple torch. She was not afraid of walking at night, but the people behind her could not. Is there anyone alive? Respond if you are alive. Is there anyone alive here? We are here to save people. Is there anyone alive? The servants behind her put their hands by their mouths. After shouting for a day, their voices had long become hoarse. Their throats were very painful. In order to cover up her abnormality, Jiang Pengji did not stop them from shouting. She only focused her mind and looked for traces of life. Suddenly, Jiang Pengji said in a hoarse voice, "Wait. Don't make a sound." She raised her hand and gestured for them to temporarily stop shouting. After one day, these people had already regarded her as a god. Her every move fell into their eyes. Even when the government did not take any action, this person was still able to stand out and not give up even a single life. This made the eyes of some simple and honest men sour. Jiang Pengji listened for a while and found that the source of the sound came from under a pile of rubble in front of her. There is a child crying. Everyone listened carefully. That intermittent crying sound was indeed that of a baby. Jiang Pengji stepped on the rubble. The dull pain from the soles of her feet went straight to her brain. It was very difficult to walk through the ruins after the earthquake. Jiang Pengji's shoes had long been useless. If the audience in the streaming room had not reminded her, she would not have even realized that the wooden clogs under her feet had been completely destroyed. The soles of her bare feet were bleeding and cut by the sharp gravel in the ruins. After returning, she asked someone to get a coarse cloth. She folded it into a stack and tied it to her feet to make it easier to walk. However, there was no time to treat the wound on the soles of her feet. The torn flesh and the coarse cloth stuck together. If it was torn, a layer of bloody skin would come off. You go here and here. Look in these two places. Move the rubble away. Jiang Pengji divided the teams. One person held a torch to illuminate the way, while the others buried their heads in work. After a day, it was unknown how much sweat they had shed and how many bowls of salt-mixed water they had drunk. After dividing the teams, Jiang Pengji forcefully moved the huge wooden beam that was weighing down on them. After a day, the skin on her palms was no longer intact. Layers of flesh and blood mixed with dust had accumulated. After moving the last piece, Jiang Pengji took the torch. Everyone looked and saw a woman curled up on the ground. Her legs and femur were crushed by the fallen beam. Only her back was still stubbornly protruding. Her head was against the ground and her arms were folded in front of her chest as if she was hugging something. The blood that flowed from her body dyed the surrounding area dark. The strong smell of blood drifted along with the night wind. Chapter 386. Behind her, a servant asked in a low voice, "Lang Jun, is she still alive?" He seemed to be afraid of startling someone, so his voice sounded cautious. Not only him, but the others also reacted the same way. She passed the torch to the servant and said coldly, "She's dead. Help me hold the torch. The child is still alive." The servant did as he was told. He took 2 steps to the side to change the angle of the torch so that the shadows wouldn't block his view. Jiang Pengji went down to the ruins and moved the heavy object that was crushing the woman away. The broken legs and femur were almost flat on the ground. The audience in the streaming room didn't dare to look directly at it. Even the bullet screen stopped. No one dared to talk about it, as if they were afraid of disturbing the dead. Jiang Pengji squatted down and tried to move the woman away, but the woman's body was already stiff. She looked down and saw that the woman had made a small space in front of her body and her arms. There was a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes lying inside. Her fingertips touched the dead and stiff skin and she said in a low voice, "I'm sorry." After moving the body away, the woman's body still maintained its arched back, which made the audience's eyes wet. This child isn't hurt. He just cried for a whole day. His throat is probably hurt. He hasn't eaten for a whole day, so he's a bit hungry. Jiang Pengji examined the child. Except for his weak crying, there was nothing else. It was obvious that the woman had protected him well. Jiang Pengji hugged the child and coaxed him gently. The child was easy to coax. She held him and shook him gently. He soon stopped crying, but his nose was still twitching. He looked very pitiful. The servant looked at the child, then at the woman, and asked in a low voice, "Lang Jun, what should we do with the lady? Should we bring her back?" "Bring her back. The weather is hot now, so it's not easy to preserve the body. If we keep it like this, it will rot and maggots will grow in 3 to 5 days. The dead are the most important. Bring her back and bury her." "It's also considered a peaceful burial," Jiang Pengji answered in a low voice, for fear of startling the child in her arms. The servant nodded and was about to move the woman out with the people around him, but Jiang Pengji spoke again. "Do you know which family this area belongs to?" Jiang Pengji looked at the woman's attire and the appearance of the corpse. She guessed the relationship between the woman and the child. In today's world, if a child who was less than 2 months old did not have the protection of elders and relatives, it was impossible for him to grow up. Even if he grew up, life would be quite difficult. If he knew which family he was from, he might be able to find the child's relatives by following the clues. However, Shangjing was so big. The servants were either brought in by Jiang Pengji or Feng Jin from outside. They were young adults living in the commoners' district. How could they know the news of every household? After asking around, no one could give a clear answer. Jiang Pengji could only sigh and give up. She had a complete map of Shangjing in her mind. She could easily find the exact location of the nearby ruins by comparing the area with the map. Forget it, I'll slowly look for it in the future. Jiang Pengji wanted to hand the child over to the servants and ask them to bring the female corpse and the child back to the camp. Unfortunately, the child immediately cried as soon as he left her arms. His cries were no louder than a kitten's, and he kept clawing at the air with his fists. His yearning look was unbearable. Ingyang Kuaixian, before watching the live stream, I never thought that my tear ducts would be so developed. Sans Hisongshu Ningshi, I'm a man, but I'm crying like a girl now. I'm typing while crying. People will think that I'm crazy. Streamer, this child is so pitiful. Just hug him a little more. If he continues to cry like this, he'll cry himself to death. Chao Lao Baorenfu, this isn't the only orphan child. There will be more in the future. Streamer, do you want to build a nursery specifically to take in these children who lost their parents in natural and man-made disasters? In the modern world, there were orphanages that would take in these children. In ancient society, if there were no kind-hearted people, these children would either die of starvation or illness, or they would end up as beggars, struggling to survive. The bullet screen gradually increased, and most of the content was heavy. In fact, no one dared to be mischievous at such a time. Jiang Pengji lowered her eyelids and glanced at the child's face, which was red from crying. Before the earthquake, the child must have been born in a wealthy family. The child's mother's clothes and makeup were very exquisite, and the child was also raised to be fair and plump. He looked very pleasing. However, she had never been a person who was easily moved by external things. No matter how miserably the child cried, Jiang Pengji still handed the child over. If she coaxed him, what would happen to the others who were waiting for rescue? If she brought the child with her to rescue, what if an accident happened and she couldn't take care of him? Lo Siji Lianmeng, in fact, it's disrespectful to hold the child and coax him at such a time. Jiang Pengji made the most correct decision, but the child could not understand it now. The servant carried the child. Seeing him crying so hard, and thinking of the child's mother, she suddenly became very soft-hearted. Lang Jun, this, Jiang Pengji thought about it, raised her hand, and tore a large piece of her outer shirt, then used the clean inner layer to wrap the child. If this did not work, then she was at her wit's end. Miraculously, the child smelled a familiar scent. He cried pitifully for a while, then slowly stopped. He's a clever one. In this family, apart from the child who was protected by the woman, there were 2 other survivors. One was an old man who, according to Jiang Pengji's judgment, was probably the housekeeper. The other was a woman with a plain face. Jiang Pengji examined her and found that she had enough milk. Looking at her clothes and where she lived, she should be the wet nurse. Apart from these 3 survivors, the other 17 people were all dead. Seeing the corpses being carried out one after another, many people were already numb to the sight. Continue the search. Bring these corpses back too. Find a place to bury them tonight. It was a hot summer day, and the corpses decomposed very quickly. If there was another rainstorm, it was not difficult to imagine what kind of terrible plague would break out when the water source was polluted. The best way was to burn the corpses, but she felt that this suggestion was very difficult to accept. Fortunately, Jiang Pengji knew how to deal with the corpses. She also knew how to make a simple disinfectant. She had taken the time to exchange 1,000 dan of food and various medicinal herbs from them all. As long as Xiaoyu brought the things back, the piled-up corpses could be dealt with. Let's search over there. Jiang Pengji rested for a while, then stood up and continued to work. On the other side, Su Ke had also found the grain depot that Jiang Pengji had marked on the map. He also found another place where medicinal herbs were stored. To avoid suspicion, Jiang Pengji exchanged for old rice that had been stored for 1 or 2 years. However, at this time, it was good enough to have something to eat. Who cared if the rice was old or new? Move all these into the carriage. Chapter 387. Jiang Pengji had stored 1,000 dan of grain in the granary. Su Ke's 30 men couldn't transport it all at once. He took a portion of the grain, which took up half of the cart space. He put the other half of the herbs and the items that Jiang Pengji had specifically asked for. Su Ke poked at the big bags of weird stuff. Even with his knowledge, he couldn't tell what they were made of. However, based on what he felt just now, those big bags should be filled with a powdery substance. It looks like lime, a servant whispered. But I've never seen this kind of bag before. Of course, the servant had never seen this kind of bag because it was an industrial paper bag. Jiang Pengji considered that cremation would be stopped, so she could only bury the corpses. Since that was the case, she had to be prepared to prevent soil pollution. She even had to think about where to bury the corpses. She flipped through the simple store. There were very few things that could be used to disinfect the corpses. She had no choice but to exchange for a few bags of lime. As far as she knew, lime already existed in this era. Households would occasionally use it to prevent moisture and mosquitoes. They would also sprinkle a layer of lime at the bottom of graves when building graves. The only thing that was out of place was the industrial paper bag that contained lime. But that was easy to solve. Anyway, the Lus already had mature papermaking technology. In the papermaking industry, the Lus had the authority. She had the final say. More importantly, Su Ke wouldn't be bothered by this kind of thing. Lime? Su Ke frowned, but he didn't suspect anything. For safety's sake, they pushed the cart back the way they came. The damage caused by the earthquake had just begun. The court hadn't taken any action to save the people. The survival of the survivors was worrying. Under such circumstances, it wasn't strange for them to turn into mobs, kill, and loot. However, they wanted to hide, but their luck was too bad. There were flames flickering in the distance. It was very scary in the dark. Will-o'-the-wisp. Those are ghost shadows, ghost shadows. At first glance, many people thought that the flames and shadows were ghosts. They immediately screamed, and panic spread among the crowd. Su Ke's face darkened. He scolded in a low voice, "All of you, shut up. Look carefully. They're all humans, not ghosts." His solemn voice carried an oppressive pressure. The servants were so scared that they didn't even dare to breathe. Su Ke's voice softened a little, and he repeated, "Z does not speak of strange powers and gods. Don't be afraid, they are all human." Everyone was too nervous. Their Adam's apple bobbed and they couldn't stop swallowing their saliva. Tonight's temperature was already hot. Now that he was nervous, his forehead was covered in sweat and his palms were wet. Su Ke lowered his voice calmly and said, "Don't make a sound. Everyone, squat down and hide." The fire in the distance was approaching them, and the originally bean-sized fire was slowly expanding. Looking at the direction in which these people were heading, it seemed that they were also preparing to enter the city. The city walls of Shangjing looked lofty and thick, but after hundreds of years of wind and rain, the inside was far more fragile than it looked. When the Earth Dragon turned over, the city wall collapsed and was damaged a lot. The soldiers guarding the gate also disappeared. The lofty and huge city gate was broken into a few pieces and looked like it was about to collapse. In order to survive, some of the lucky survivors packed up their belongings and sneaked out of the city through the city gate. At this time, the commoners were running for their lives, so why would they enter the city? Su Ku frowned deeply, wondering if this group of people was a relief team sent by the imperial court. If that was the case, the people of Shangjing would have hope. After half an hour, Su Ku dispelled the speculation in his mind. There were many people in that group of ghost shadows. The night was too dark, so Su Ku couldn't determine the specific number. Listening carefully, their footsteps were heavy and steady. No one talked among the team, only the sound of footsteps and the rolling of the cart wheels could be heard. Su Ku had already asked people to push more than 10 carts to a dark place, and they carefully hid in a place with their backs to the light. Now that the moon was dim, under normal circumstances, they would not be discovered. However, his strong psychological quality did not mean that his teammates also had hearts forged from steel. Although that was what people said, humans were naturally afraid of the unknown. When they encountered a phenomenon that they could not explain, they often liked to push these phenomena onto ghosts and gods. The group of people walked through a small path not far away, and the distance between the two sides was very close. Seeing this, Su Ku's expression became extremely serious. Everyone was even more nervous. One of the servants was even trembling. His stomach loosened, and a warm, pungent smell came out. Su Ku glanced at him, but did not say anything. Unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. His stupid teammate still dropped the ball for him. Just as the strange team was about to walk halfway, the servant at the back of the team suddenly jumped up with a ferocious expression. He let out a painful cry for help, and his right arm kept waving. Vaguely, a long thing could be seen swinging in the air. Looking closely, it was actually a snake. "Snake, there's a snake!" This person's cry startled the others, and the procession instantly became chaotic. Many servants who were hiding on the ground also jumped up in fright, and quickly moved away from the person who was bitten by the snake. At this time, the unknown procession was also alerted. "Who's there?" Su Ku's heart sank, and he secretly gritted his teeth. What kind of lousy luck was this? The scene that he most didn't want to see happened. The unknown team surrounded them with guns. Burning tongues of fire licked continuously, and from time to time, there was an explosive sound. Su Ku's neck was pressed against the enemy's sharp blade, and his life was no longer in his hands. He secretly took a deep breath, and suppressed those distracting thoughts. His back was perfectly straight, and his blood-stained black date Confucian robe made him look proud and unyielding. "These people are suspicious, arrest all of them." No one knew who said this, but the group of people with guns moved forward to arrest them. "Wait!" The two sides confronted each other. Su Ku was not afraid of the threat, and raised his hand to stop them. With a calm expression, he said, "The Earth Dragon turned over, and caused Shangjing to be in a state of devastation. Not even 1 out of 10 people survived. I was ordered by fate to deliver food and medicine, and this concerns the lives of many people. It cannot be delayed for even a moment, and I hope that everyone can make an exception. Previously, I saw your whereabouts, and to prevent misunderstandings, I avoided you. If you are still not willing to believe me, I am willing to go with you. However, there are many snakes in the forest, and one of the workers transporting the food was accidentally bitten by a snake. I wonder if you can save him." This group of people also looked at each other, not knowing how to deal with them. They were already tired from the journey at night, and in a moment of relaxation, they did not notice that there was a group of people ambushing at such a close distance. If these people had evil intentions, they would definitely be caught off guard. Chapter 388. They did not let down their guard. More than 10 people continued to point their spears at them. Another 2 people carried torches and went forward to check. Under the illumination of the torches, they saw more than 10 hidden carts with medicinal herbs and food on them. It's a non-venomous black snake. One bite won't kill you. Stop howling. Another person came forward with a torch. With the help of the light, the big guy found that the snake was still biting the pale-faced servant. That person looked carefully and knew that it was a non-venomous snake. It was very common in the wild. He lifted his hand and pulled it down. He rolled it up in his hand and threw it with his strong right arm. The snake was thrown far away. After a while, there was the sound of grass and trees shaking. The servant heard this and stopped trembling. He looked down at the wound on his wrist. The blood was bright red and there were no signs of poisoning. But when we go back, we still need to wash it with clean water and apply some medicine to reduce the swelling. This way, the wound will heal faster. The movement here also alerted the people in front of the group. Thus, the group stopped. At the front of the group, a man dressed like a scholar had gloomy eyes like thick ink. What happened? We found a group of suspicious people. They claimed to be helping the people of Shangjing to transport food and medicine. The man heard this and raised his eyebrows. Oh. Take me to see. If they are really doing this for the people, why are they hiding? Sir, I will go with you. Beside the man was a strong man with a thick beard. His muscles seemed to be bursting out of the brown on his body. With one look, one could tell what kind of explosive power was contained in his muscles. Huang Tan brought 1,000 imperial guards and 500 dan of food and entered from the collapsed east gate of Shangjing. The imperial guards held up hundreds of torches. From afar, it looked like a slowly moving fireball floating in the air. Huang Tan squinted his eyes and used the light to see the surrounding situation. He could not help but sigh. A natural disaster was not something a human could resist. 2 days ago, the bustling Shangjing was now in ruins. The night wind carried an unspeakable stench. He took out a handkerchief from his bosom and covered his nose with it. He raised his hand. Go! At this time, a weak cry for help came from under the collapsed ruins. Help, 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 such a weak voice, coupled with the darkness of the night, was rather frightening. The imperial guards were in an uproar. Many of them looked fearful. Huang Tan's expression did not change and he waved his hand. The announcement of the imperial edict is more important. Don't delay it. Shangjing had become a dead city. Even Huang Tan, a great eunuch who had seen much of the world, could not help but have goosebumps. Jiang Pengji lived in the east of the city, and the campsite was also built in the east of the city. Huang Tan and his group entered the city from the east gate, so the distance between the two was not far. In addition, the candles in the campsite were not extinguished, so it was very conspicuous in the dark, which reduced Huang Tan's trouble in finding them. Is the second son of the Liu family here? Huang Tan brought people to proclaim the imperial edict. Along the way, they caused quite a commotion. Feng Jin saw it from afar and prepared to receive the imperial edict. Feng Jin said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, Erlang is leading people to rescue the people and won't be able to come back in a short time. Angel, please take a rest. Huang Tan looked like he was not looking sideways, but in fact, he had already used the corner of his eyes to scan the rough, makeshift campsite. His ears were filled with the cries of pain from the injured. The air was filled with the fragrance of medicine, but more of it was the thick and choking smell of blood. If one smelled it too much, they would feel their stomachs churning and their throats would be filled with a sour taste. What is this smell? As a great eunuch, Huang Tan lived like a prince. Feng Jin was the son of an aristocratic family. Did he grow up rolling in the mud? He could not stand it either. But when he thought of the tragic situation of the people during the earthquake, the discomfort was nothing. Feng Jin saw him frown, so he thought of a compromise. "Angel, please forgive us. The campsite is rough and dirty, and there are many injured people. To prevent the filth on the people from hurting you, I would like to ask you to wait in another place. I will send someone to call the second Lang Jun back." He coaxed Huang Tan to wait in a corner. There was a small shed, an incense burner, and a burning sandalwood incense. It diluted the smell in the air. Huang Tan sat down on the stool, his eyes sweeping across the room. He saw a shadow that looked like a small hill in the distance. He pointed and asked, "What is that?" It was windy, and the smell was especially bad. If it were not for the 2 incense burners beside him, he would have vomited. Feng Jin looked over and smiled bitterly. He said, "Angel, those are the people who lost their lives during the earthquake. The weather is hot now, and there are a lot of flies. The bodies are not easy to preserve. They will rot and grow maggots in 3 to 5 days. The bodies will rot and stink. If they are not handled properly, it will easily lead to all kinds of diseases. So during the search and rescue, we dug out these bodies and buried them later." At first, Huang Tan was still able to listen calmly, but as Feng Jin continued, the blush on his face slowly faded, turning into a pale white, and then into a livid green. His eyesight was not bad, he could even see the outline of the small mountain in the dark. Such a high hill was actually made up of corpses. Thinking of this, Huang Tan couldn't hold it in anymore. His stomach rolled and a yellowish substance was spat out from his mouth. In the filth, there were abalones, shark fins, fat and other things that hadn't been digested completely. Feng Jin secretly glanced at it and the corner of his mouth pulled into a faint sneer. After waiting for half an hour, Huang Tan thought of the shadow of the small hill not far away. He could not sit still. It was as if he was sitting on pins and needles. Fortunately, at this time, there was a sound of nature from afar. The main character, Lu Shi, had arrived. Huang Tan had seen Lu Shi before. He was a handsome and arrogant young man. If he was 1 or 2 years older, he would be the man that countless girls adored. Now that they met again, Huang Tan almost suspected that his eyes were blurred. The person in front of him was actually Lu Shi. Jiang Pengji saw Huang Tan's dazed look and then looked down at her own appearance. She frowned in her heart. She knew that she now looked like a beggar who hadn't bathed for 2 or 3 years. Her sleeves were torn and tattered, and her clothes were stained with blood and other filth. She couldn't tell the original color at all. The dirt and sweat were stuck to her face, and she almost couldn't tell her original appearance. Not to mention that Jiang Pengji's hands were badly mutilated. Her feet were wrapped in thick coarse cloth, and only a few pieces were left. Not to mention beggars, even those who had fled for more than 10 years looked cleaner than her. The second son of the Lu family received the decree. In view of Jiang Pengji's pitiful state, Huang Tan could not help but avert his gaze. His heart was filled with emotions. He believed that Lu Shi was truly benevolent and only cared about the people. He was not like those pretentious vermin who had a glib tongue but did not move his hands. "I, Lu Shi, kneel down to receive the decree of the emperor." Huang Tan took out an exquisite roll of silk from his sleeve. He slowly unfolded it and read it in a sharp voice. In another place, "Yo, long time no see. Xiaoyu, why are you in such a sorry state?" The young scholar rode on the horse and smiled with some interest. Su Ku opened his eyes wide in shock. He could not believe it. Chapter 389. Qiguan Rang held the reins with both hands, still holding the feather fan that never left his side. "Xiaoyu, you're very smart. Guess?" Even he didn't expect to see his old friend under such circumstances. "Guess?" Guess my ass. Su Ku pursed his lips and glanced at the young man holding the torch. Troops? Yes, Qiguan Rang answered with a smile. If he wasn't riding a big horse, Su Ku really wanted to pull Qiguan Rang off the horse and beat him up. Why are Langjuan's troops here? Troops were private troops. They were armed forces. Why did Qiguan Rang bring so many troops from Chongzhou to here? Qiguan Rang didn't speak, but Meng Han cupped his hands and said, Master Qiguan knows Langjun is in trouble, that's why he came. Su Ku said, why didn't I know Wenjing has the ability to predict the future? Qiguan Rang smiled but didn't say anything. He glanced at the cart that was being pushed out, then at Su Ku and his men. He had an idea. This isn't a good time to bicker. If Xiaoyu suspects Rang, it won't be too late to question him later. Lives are at stake. Xiaoyu, lead the way so we can meet Langjun as soon as possible. Qiguan Rang gave him a look. We shouldn't stay here for long. Su Ku understood this, but he didn't understand why Qiguan Rang would appear outside of Shangjing City. If that's the case, I'll explain when we get back. Su Ku's face darkened. It was indeed not the right time to talk about this. The troops' training methods were still set by Jiang Pengji, but the amount of training was much heavier than before. After 3 to 4 years of training, even a pig could walk on 2 legs, let alone these carefully selected young men. Most of them were bandits. They used to be fierce, but after a few years, they became elite troops that obeyed orders. Meng Han waved his hand. Someone immediately led a horse forward. He said, Master Su, get on the horse. How many troops did you bring? Su Ku saw Meng Han and his mind became clear. He knew that Qiguan Rang brought people out through proper channels. When Jiang Pengji left, she handed over the running of the troops to Meng Han. Qiguan Rang would occasionally come over to help. Without the two of them, Jiang Pengji would not be comfortable being a hands-off shopkeeper. He brought a total of 3,000 people, Qiguan Rang said. He then added, but there are only about 1,000 people here. Meng Han was a martial artist, but he was very sensitive. He could smell the subtle atmosphere between the two, so he could not help but take over the conversation and separate the two. The other 2,000 have been sent out to rescue the people of Fengyi County. Meng Han thought about it and said, don't worry, Mr. Su. These 3,000 troops were brought out from Chongzhou. Most of the time, they are scattered. They definitely won't cause you any trouble. Almost every landowning household had a troop, and they varied in size. During times of peace, they had to be kept in check and not allowed to wander around. If they were discovered to be gathering on a large scale, they might suspect that they were trying to stir up trouble. By then, the leader of the troop would be in trouble. Su Ku listened and agreed. His expression softened a little, but his furrowed brows still showed no signs of relaxing. He knew that Qiguan Rang was cautious by nature and would not hand over such a big weakness to the enemy. That was indeed the case. After the troops left Chongzhou, they were scattered and arranged to meet at the border of Shanyang County and Fengyi County. They did not arouse any suspicions along the way. But he still minded that Qiguan Rang had mobilized the 3,000 troops without Jiang Pengji's permission. Qiguan Rang ordered the 3,000 troops to hide in a hidden valley and set up camp there. They had been hiding for a few days. After the earthquake, none of the troops died. But a few unlucky ones were smashed by the fallen tents and suffered minor injuries. Qiguan Rang had never been to Shangjing. Looking at the towering city gate, he could imagine the luxurious buildings behind it. However, after passing through the broken city gate, the scene behind the gate struck his heart, causing his pupils to shrink. It was a scene of desolation and ruins. Where was the luxurious scene he had imagined? They entered the city from the north gate. The nearby areas had not been searched. When a few lucky survivors heard the footsteps, they immediately thought of ways to make noise to attract the attention of the living. The scene was a little horrifying, but the troops' expressions did not change. They were not affected by the outside world. Why, didn't the court send anyone over? Or, haven't they found this place? Qiguan Rang had been living in the small valley for a while and was not well informed about the outside world. If the earthquake had not happened, he would have continued squatting there and waited for Jiang Pengji to come over. Su Ke's face was cold. He sneered and said, "How can the Son of Heaven, who sits in the 9 heavens imperial court, hear the cries of human suffering?" Qiguan Rang's heart sank. The earthquake had happened for a day and a night, but the court had not taken any action. Why? Even if he did not know about the golden rescue time, he knew that the longer it dragged on, the more people would die. Dozens of troops were left behind to rescue the few people who had asked for help from the ruins. Jiang Pengji accepted the imperial edict. Huang Tan left 1,000 imperial guards and 500 dawn of rations and could not wait to leave. The smell of this place was too strong. Looking at Huang Tan being escorted away by hundreds of people, Jiang Pengji clenched the imperial edict in her hand and remained expressionless. She glanced at the imperial guards. Who is in charge here? Because the space was limited and there were too many people, only 3 people followed Huang Tan to stand in front of her. The rest were waiting outside. After she finished speaking, someone came forward and cupped his hands. He said in a low, muffled voice, "It's me." Jiang Pengji looked at the man carefully. He was about 8 feet tall and had a stocky back and a bear's waist. He was burly and strong. 1 step forward was equivalent to 2 steps for a normal person. He wore the armor of the imperial guards and a thin shirt underneath. The thin shirt could not hide his muscles at all. Jiang Pengji was not short among men her age, but she had to raise her head in front of this man. "What's your name?" "I'm Luo Yu. The Emperor has bestowed you all to me. During this period of time, your lives will be decided by me. You only need to follow my orders." Jiang Pengji said calmly, "If anyone disobeys, kill them on the spot. There's no need to bury them." Hearing this, Luo Yu frowned. He was slightly unhappy. The imperial guards protected the safety of Shangjing. In their hearts, they were different from ordinary people. Even if the person in front of them had an extraordinary background, he was still a commoner. If not for the emperor's orders, he had no right to order them around. But Jiang Pengji said such words. Jiang Pengji saw the flash of unhappiness in his eyes. She snorted coldly in her heart. If she did not need manpower, she would not be bothered to deal with such a person. But pride was pride. This Luo Yu in front of her had some ability. It would be perfect if he could kidnap the 1,000 imperial guards after the earthquake. Jiang Pengji looked down. The evil water in her heart started to boil again. At that moment, her ears twitched. She heard the footsteps of 1,000 people. She raised her eyebrows and asked Luo Yu, "The Emperor sent more imperial guards?" 2,000. Chapter 390. Luo Yu was confused. He didn't understand why Jiang Pengji asked him that. As an imperial guard, he had to listen to her orders. As far as I know, there are only 1,000 of them. The imperial edict was written clearly. How could there be 1,000 more people? Jiang Pengji furrowed her brows and listened to the footsteps. It seemed like they were coming towards them. Luo Yu's hearing was not as good as Jiang Pengji's, but he couldn't help but tighten his muscles and put on a vigilant expression. He looked at Luo Yu, who seemed to be ready to attack. He squinted his eyes as if he was sizing something up. Thud, 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 the orderly and steady footsteps were getting closer. The imperial guards waiting outside also discovered the traces of the unfamiliar forces. The crowd became more and more chaotic. Jiang Pengji couldn't sit still anymore. She got up and walked past Luoyue and the other 3 imperial guards. A small ball of fire appeared in her sight. As they got closer, the ball of fire became clearer. There were 3 people riding on tall horses in front of the troops. As a warrior, Meng Han had the best vision. He quickly spotted Jiang Pengji and his face lit up. He urged his horse to run a few steps faster. Lang Jun, subordinate Meng Han greets you. Meng Han wouldn't forget Jiang Pengji's face even if she was in a sorry state. Jiang Pengji recognized the 3 people from afar. She almost thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. She only came back to her senses when Meng Han got off his horse and couldn't suppress the excitement on his face. She helped Meng Han up and looked at Qiguan Rang with a faint smile. According to her understanding, Meng Han couldn't do such a thing. He couldn't run around with his troops and appear in front of her at such a critical moment. Thinking about it, the only person who could do such a thing was Qiguan Rang. Wenjing once said that you would appear when she needs you the most. Is it now? Jiang Pengji stepped forward. Qiguan Rang stepped on his stirrups and got off. He flicked his dusty sleeves and bowed deeply to her. He smiled bitterly and said, "Man proposes but God disposes. I wanted to wait for you near Fengyi County. I didn't expect the earthquake." Jiang Pengji helped him up and asked, "Why wait in Fengyi County?" Qiguan Rang was about to speak when he caught sight of the imperial guards. His eyes flashed and he swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Jiang Pengji noticed his actions and raised her hand to ask Luoyue to bring the imperial guards further away. Although Luoyue was unwilling, as a small leader of the imperial guards, he could naturally see that Jiang Pengji's troops were also rare elite troops. Meng Han, who was leading the way, had a reserved aura. His stature alone could intimidate the group of thieves and robbers. He led his men and retreated more than 10 meters. Originally, according to Rang's calculations, Lang Jun would probably be hunted down. I calculated all the possible routes and thought that the border between Shangyang County and Fengyi County was the most likely one. So I brought some people to hide there and provide support for Lang Jun. Who knew that an earthquake would mess up my plan? Qiguan Rang spread his hands and wore an expression that said, "What can I do? I'm desperate too." No matter how meticulous one's plans were, they couldn't stand against the heavens not giving them face. Someone will hunt me down. Why? Jiang Pengji crossed her arms in front of her chest. It wasn't that she didn't believe Qiguan Rang's words, she was just curious. Qiguan Rang shook his head and said, "Now that everything has changed, I'll only be a laughing stock if I tell you my plans." It was obvious that Qiguan Rang didn't want to talk about it. The earthquake not only messed up Qiguan Rang's plan, but it also made the relatives and eunuchs who were eager to get rid of the emperor and the nobles. The crown prince, who was preparing to force the emperor to abdicate, had even more energy but had no place to use it. He only cared about running for his life and didn't care about these great things. Jiang Pengji pondered for a while and said, "Even if you don't say it, I can guess. No matter what, I still have to thank you." With a lack of manpower, one could imagine Jiang Pengji's feelings when she saw the people she could have saved die helplessly while waiting. Now, Qiguan Rang brought 3,000 troops. 2,000 of them were already searching for the people in Fengyi County. The remaining 1,000 could also be of great help to her. "Lang Jun, you flatter me. This is my duty." Qiguan Rang squinted his eyes. His usually gloomy eyes were more peaceful. Jiang Pengji's heart skipped a beat when she heard his words. The smile on her face became more radiant. If that's the case, it's better to do it sooner rather than later. Jiang Pengji's expression turned solemn. The earthquake this time caused countless casualties among the people. The weather is hot now, so the corpses can't be kept for too long. To prevent rot and maggots from growing, we should find a place to bury them as soon as possible to prevent an epidemic. Qiguanrang nodded and said, "Everything is up to you." With 1,000 imperial guards, 1,000 private troops, and the people she had recruited previously, Jiang Pengji had a lot more people at her disposal. She called Qiguanrang, Feng Jin, Su Ku, Meng Han, and the imperial guard Luoyue over to prepare for a new search and rescue plan. Jiang Pengji couldn't be bothered with Luoyue's thoughts. As long as he listened to her obediently, that was enough. "Xiaoyu, did you bring the things I asked you to transport?" With the 500 dawn of rations provided by the emperor, their rations could last for a few days. As for the medicinal ingredients, she ordered people to search a few medicine shops. The people inside were all dead. The medicinal ingredients that no one wanted were borrowed by her. If they were used sparingly, they could last for half a day. In that case, the most important thing was the lime needed to bury the corpses. Su Ku was stunned for a moment and said, "I've brought it. It's all in the carriage." Jiang Pengji said, "Get people to unload all the rations and medicinal ingredients. Cover the carriage with a layer of straw or something else. Bury the corpses tonight. Judging from the weather, it will rain in a few days. If the corpses decompose, the corpse water will mix with the rainwater and enter the ground, contaminating the well water. Then we'll have a tough battle. If the contaminated water is drunk, it will easily give birth to diseases." Jiang Pengji calmly narrated. The expressions of the people sitting around changed. They had rich imaginations. Their minds could not help but picture the scene Jiang Pengji described. They suddenly felt disgusted. East, west, north, and south of the city. Jiang Pengji used a branch to draw a map of Shangjing on the ground. She divided it into 4 areas and sent 450 people to each area for search and rescue. Each area was divided in detail. She even explained the transportation route. Jiang Pengji's train of thought was very clear. She assigned the tasks in less than 15 minutes. The people present were not stupid. They memorized their respective tasks and waited for Jiang Pengji's order. Feng Jin was worried about another thing. If the poisonous corpse water would enter the ground along with the rainwater and contaminate the well water, then they had to think carefully about where to bury the corpses. Of course, Jiang Pengji had considered that. She circled an area. It's on a hill outside the east of the city. It's close to the east of the city, so it's convenient to transport the corpses. The terrain is high and it's far from the moat. It's not connected to the underground water. Outside the east of the city, the terrain is remote. There are few people and few villages. Considering all the conditions, it's better to bury the corpses here. Chapter 391. The full moon in the sky was covered by a layer of gray clouds. The hazy moonlight was dim and dispirited. Outside Shangjing City, the continuous sound of shoveling rose and fell. Shovelfuls of soil were thrown from the bottom of the pit to the edge. Those who did not know would have thought that some godforsaken people were digging up their ancestral graves. After the efforts of hundreds of people, there was a huge pit in the ground. A thick layer of soil was piled up beside the pit. This depth is about right. Continue to dig outwards. If they dug too shallow, the soil on the ground might be washed away by the heavy rain, revealing the corpses underneath. If they dug too deep, the work would be huge. Their time was precious and they could not afford to waste it. Jiang Pengji tore open the bag of lime at the edge of the pit. She wrapped her hands in a layer of cloth and scooped up some lime with a ladle that she found in the rice shop. Use this to spread the soil at the bottom of the pit, then cover it with another layer of soil. Be careful when you do this. Don't touch your skin. Hundreds of people worked together quickly. The huge pit was almost dug by the second half of the night. The audience in the streaming room watched the whole night with fear. They shuddered at the thought that such a huge pit would be used to bury corpses. To ease the horrifying atmosphere, many audience members spontaneously told jokes to amuse them, but the effect was minimal. As time passed, corpses were sent to the bottom of the pit one after another. Jiang Pengji watched in silence. The others were even more silent. The afterglow of the morning shone through the branches and leaves, leaving mottled cracks on the ground. The scene in the pit could be seen clearly. Not to mention the imperial guards, even her private troops could not help but hold their stomachs and retch. Some squatted on the ground with red eyes. They had not slept the whole night. At that moment, no one dared to say they were tired. They all stared at the corpses at the bottom of the pit in silence for a long time. Jiang Pengji's hoarse voice was heard. "Bury them. This pit is not enough to bury people." After she finished speaking, she grabbed the shovel with both hands and shoveled soil into the pit. Only then did everyone react. They obeyed the order mechanically. After a layer of soil was covered, Jiang Pengji asked someone to spread a layer of lime and then continued to shovel soil. They piled up a tall grave and compacted the soil to prevent wild beasts or hungry birds from causing trouble. Finally, they inserted a wordless tombstone. "Everyone must be tired after a night. Go wash your hands and face, eat something, and rest for 4 hours before you hand over your shift." The morning sun was like flowing golden sand, dazzling and beautiful. The imperial guards and troops who had stayed up all night to dig the pit to bury the corpses felt a little tired and sleepy. They wanted to stick their eyelids together. Previously, their nerves had been stretched taut, but now that they were relaxed, all of them wished they could lie down and sleep. But compared to being sleepy, filling his stomach was more important. There were 2 huge pots of porridge and steaming buns. Smelling the fragrance in the air, everyone's stomachs rumbled like thunder. He was really starving. They lined up to wash their hands and faces, took their portion of porridge and steamed bun, found a place to squat down, and started eating. The imperial guards ate in a refined manner, but the troops looked as if they hadn't eaten for years. Some of them ate too fast and almost choked. In order to meet up with Jiang Pengji as soon as possible, the troops rushed all the way under Qiguan Rang's request. They hadn't slept for almost 3 days and 2 nights, including the night before. Their eyes were dark, and their gazes were erratic. Now that they had the hot porridge and steamed bun, they suddenly felt refreshed. When they were full, their limbs were filled with warmth. Many of them leaned against the trees and started snoring. Jiang Pengji saw that and her eyes were filled with relief. She carefully stuffed her portion of food into her mouth and ate it clean. With the help of 1,000 imperial guards and 1,000 troops, the efficiency of the search and rescue was incomparable. More and more injured were sent to the camp for the wounded. Most of them were corpses. Since the weather was hot, the corpses were carried out of the ruins and buried outside the city. If the corpses of other small animals were found, they were burned on the spot. The camp's surroundings had to be cleaned regularly and lime was scattered. "What is this?" Feng Jin held a strange-looking thing in his hand. Qiguan Rang and the others also received it. "A mask." Jiang Pengji frowned and answered. The audience in the streaming room had reminded her to make it. There was no such thing as a mask in her era. Or it could be said that it had been eliminated for thousands of years and was an antique in the history books. "What does it do?" Feng Jin looked at it for a long time but did not know how to use it. It did not look like a handkerchief, but it was too small to call it a curtain. "Cover the mouth and nose." For ropes are tied to the back of the head to secure it. Most diseases enter through the mouth and nose. If you use this to cover the mouth and nose and pay attention to food and water, it may reduce the incidence of diseases. Jiang Pengji explained and then used her own mask to demonstrate how to use it. Feng Jin listened and felt that it made some sense. This is a good thing. It can also cover up the smell. The corpses that piled up like a mountain were buried, but the camp for the wounded was full of patients. Occasionally, a few who were seriously ill were carried out. The air was filled with the thick smell of blood. After wearing the mask, the situation was better. The mask that Jiang Pengji mentioned was not exchanged from the mall. In fact, the mall was rubbish. They did not even sell masks. She asked a few maids to pick out the more breathable fabric and folded 2 or 3 layers. Then, she simply sewed them together and made a few masks. It would not be too uncomfortable to wear them on hot days. However, the fabric was limited. The simple masks that she made were first used by a few important people. After they were used up, they could be boiled again and then dried before being used again. The only thing to be thankful for was that halfway through the second day of the earthquake, apart from a fever and coma, there were no other symptoms of diseases. Even so, Jiang Pengji could not be at ease too early. She still needed to prepare for a rainy day. Looking at the pitiful mall, she pulled out the system and gave it a good beating in her heart. Rubbish. The imprisoned system heard her angry rebuke and snorted. Was it to be blamed? Compared to the trashy system, the people in the streaming room were much cuter. They heard that Jiang Pengji was worried about the plague, so they gathered together to think of a solution. Even 3 heads can beat 1, Zhuge Liang. With 150,000 viewers, they really had a solution. Dadiozo, host, I suddenly remembered a time travel novel I read before. The female protagonist used reed roots to cure the 4th brother's disease. Although I don't know if it is reliable, you can boil it for people to drink. Maybe it can prevent the disease. Lucian Walushui, it can't be. Can a web novel be trusted? Zhuge Chestnut, well, reed root boiled water has the effect of clearing body heat, stopping vomiting, and diuresis. It mainly treats febrile diseases, vomiting due to stomach heat, coughing due to heat in the lungs, vomiting pus due to lung pain, and pain due to hot drenching. The above content is from Baidu. If he hadn't checked, he wouldn't have known. Now that he did, he was shocked. Boiled reed roots seem to be very powerful. Many diseases have symptoms of vomiting and diarrhea. Maybe, it should be useful. Xuanlu Dianqi, #rubbing face, please help me. The host needs your help now. Jiang Pengji looked at the bullet screen and sighed softly. It was useless to have a master. There was a shortage of medicinal ingredients. The medicinal ingredients in the mall were the most common ones. Those that were slightly more expensive could not be bought. Speaking of luck, a middle-aged man was rescued from the ruins. He was a doctor and his injuries were not serious. Now he had replaced the maids in the residence and become the chief doctor of the camp for the wounded. He had basically taken away all the medicinal ingredients dug out from the ruins of the medicine shops to save lives. Jiang Pengji glanced at the few medicinal ingredients in the mall and decided to buy more mugwort leaves and reed roots based on the opinions of the viewers. Mugwort leaves could inhibit and kill many bacteria and viruses. They were good for disinfecting the patients. Chapter 392. On the 3rd day of the earthquake, the emperor decreed that the capital would be moved to Chenzhou. Even though Feng Jin and the others had expected the emperor to move the capital, they were still silent when the decree was issued. The people were even more grief-stricken when they heard the news. Their cries shook the heavens. Some old women even cried until they fainted. After experiencing the earthquake for 3 days, the viewers in the streaming room had trained their hearts to be strong, but they still felt sad when they saw the scene. Even though they didn't understand why they felt sad. Tudo Xiongniu, sigh. It's just moving the capital, it's not like the country is going to perish. Why are they crying like this? Dadiozo, pft, it's easy for you to say. They're not crying about the capital, they're crying about being abandoned. Lo Siji Lianmeng, this streaming room isn't under the government's control, so I'll use an inappropriate analogy. Let's say there's such a terrible earthquake in the capital of Hua country. Less than 10% of the people are alive, and the country doesn't do anything for 3 days. Everyone had doubts in their hearts, but they still trusted the country and waited patiently for reinforcements. Then, the higher-ups said that the capital was too dilapidated and there was no value in rescuing them. They were going to relocate the capital and ignore the people who had suffered from the disaster. Take a guess, how did the people who had been abandoned feel? How will they feel about being abandoned? The country will be done for. Tudo xiongniu gafen, no, that's not an appropriate analogy. If our country dares to do that, more than 1 billion people will curse us to death. Besides, the internet is so advanced now. If there's no rescue for 3 hours, the whole country will be in chaos, let alone 3 days. Zuanbujufei, whether the analogy is appropriate or not is another matter. Anyway, I understand what Lao Siji is trying to say. Kong bugai fengming, sigh, if I were one of the people, I'd cry too. What's the use of people living in the face of a devastated homeland? If the country doesn't care, it means that the possibility of rebuilding their homeland is almost zero. There's no hope for the future. In ancient times, the people had blind trust in the emperor because he was the Son of Heaven. They couldn't see their future if they were abandoned by the Son of Heaven. In such a sad atmosphere, Jiang Pengji pursed her lips. You really have too much energy and nowhere to release it. You still have the mood to cry at a time like this. Luo Yu was a commoner, so he was also sad. But after hearing Jiang Pengji's heartless words, he almost couldn't breathe. If not for the emperor's order, he really did not want to listen to this person's orders. Did I say something wrong? Jiang Pengji glanced at him with disdain. Luo Yu choked and subconsciously wanted to retort, but those words were stuck in his throat and he couldn't say them no matter what. Subconsciously, he felt a little guilty. Watching Jiang Pengji's figure gradually disappear into the distance, Qiguan Rang elbowed him as he passed by. The Son of Heaven has indeed abandoned these people, but why don't you take a look at why they are still alive and not buried in the ruins? Lang Jun was right. She had too much energy and nothing to do. What was there to cry about? Why aren't you grateful to Lang Jun when you're so affectionate? Qiguan Rang shook his head with an expression that said, "These foolish people are hopeless." Luo Yu's expression turned solemn as he said righteously, "How can you say that? If not for His Majesty's decree, Lu Langjun would also." Qiguan Rang didn't let him finish his sentence and said directly, "That's not right. If it wasn't for my Langjuan's kindness and volunteering to take on this difficult task, do you think the emperor would have sent other people to rescue the people?" Even though Lang Jun pleaded with the emperor, in the end, only a small 1,000 imperial guards and 500 dawn of food were allocated. Tell me, how many people can this small number of people and this small amount of food save? Luo Yu wanted to refute, but in the end, he could only blush in embarrassment. However, his skin was darker, so it wasn't obvious. Qiguan Rang said sarcastically, "There are 100,000 imperial guards, but in the end, only 1,000 were allocated. That's really a lot." Even during the snowstorm in Shangjing a few years ago, the court had allocated 30,000 taels of silver for disaster relief. Although the amount of silver that fell into the hands of the people was very little, it was still an attitude. Nowadays, the court was completely shameless. They sent people away with 1,000 imperial guards and 500 dawn of food. One had to know that the earthquake this time affected Shangyang County and Fengyi County, almost 2/3 of Wanzhou. The death toll was dozens of times that of the snowstorm that year. Qiguan Rang sneered. His sinister eyes made Luo Yu's heart go cold. As more people were rescued, the demand for rice and medicinal herbs increased. Jiang Pengji exchanged for 20,000 dawn of food and a large number of mugwort leaves and reed roots. Every time, she asked Su Ku to bring people to collect it. Part of it was reserved for the people of Shangjing to eat, and part of it was transported to Fengyi County, where Qiguan Rang had left 2,000 troops for rescue. Shangjing was the epicenter of the earthquake, so the death toll was especially heavy. Fengyi County was some distance away. There were many people alive, so the consumption of rice and medicinal herbs was especially large. Jiang Pengji couldn't always exchange food from them all. It was fine in the short term, but it was easy to get into trouble in the long run. If she was surrounded by stupid teammates, it would be fine for her to perform a big change. The key was that each teammate was smarter than the other. That wouldn't work. If it wasn't for the second branch of the Lu family having a lot of money and having a grain store business all over Dongqing, they probably wouldn't be able to fool Su Ku. Therefore, it was important to increase income and reduce expenditure. There are many dignitaries in Shangjing. There will always be some good things in the warehouses of each family. Jiang Pengji said expressionlessly, anyway, these people are going to move away. The things will rot if they are left behind. Why don't we dig them out and recycle them so that the people can benefit? Jiang Pengji said it so clearly. She was just short of telling everyone to go rob them. Qiguan Rang could accept it because he was not a gentleman. Su Ku felt a little awkward. This kind of behavior was no different from stealing and looting. But thinking of the people outside, there was no other way. Meng Han had always listened to Jiang Pengji. Not to mention cleaning up the ruins, he felt that there was nothing wrong with directly blocking the road and robbing. The only person who objected was Feng Jin. He had received so many years of formal education. If he suddenly ran to collude with Jiang Pengji, he wouldn't be Feng Jin. Jiang Pengji asked, Huayu, what good ideas do you have? Feng Jin was stared at by the others. After a while, he said embarrassedly, at least, leave an IOU? Everyone was speechless. The people of each family and manor had all left. Who would write the IOU for? However, if doing so would make Feng Jin feel better, then write it. It wouldn't take much effort anyway. Jiang Pengji said, yes, what Huayu said makes sense. If we wait until the earthquake is over and people come back to the old site to see that everything has been moved away, they might curse. Writing an IOU can at least show that we are not robbers and that we are only temporarily borrowing. Jiang Pengji said the word borrowing with a profound meaning. Qiguan Rang smiled but didn't say anything. Borrowing without returning was still borrowing. For days after the earthquake, the number of people rescued had reached 18,000. The number of corpses buried outside the city was as high as 70,000. There were 120,000 permanent residents in Shangjing. Based on this calculation, there was still a gap of tens of thousands. Chapter 393. Ah, this beautiful woman is indeed favored by the heavens. Huijun touched her face with her right hand and looked at herself in the mirror with a pair of charming eyes. She was flawless no matter what angle she looked at her. She didn't even want to look at the rouge and powder on the dressing table. If she applied it to her face, it would only damage her skin. The palace maids at the side served her carefully. Ever since this favored woman appeared by the emperor's side, the number of palace maids being defiled had plummeted. No, it should be said that since then, the emperor had no interest in other women and indirectly saved many of them. Your Highness is a natural beauty. Even the celestial concubines in heaven can't compare. A quick-witted palace maid spoke up and combed her hair into an extremely luxurious style, accentuating her slender and fair neck, complementing her seductive charm. Huijun had a seductive smile on her face as she praised, "You have a sweet mouth. This is your reward." She didn't even look at it. She threw the East Pearl that the emperor had given her to the palace maid and continued to be obsessed with the mirror. Daily Narcissism, 1/1, completed. Ever since the emperor's imperial edict to move the capital was issued, the entire palace became busy. However, this didn't affect Hui Jun. As the only favored woman in the harem, she was extremely arrogant. Not to mention the princes and princesses, even the empress and the crown prince had to give way to her. However, she was a little unlucky today. The palace maids were busy packing up and a moment of carelessness had allowed someone who shouldn't have appeared in front of her. Wuma Jun's face was haggard. His young face was filled with sadness. His face was full of stubble and he looked very dejected. Hui Jun had wanted to come out to admire the flowers. However, her good mood was instantly shattered when she saw Wuma Jun appear out of nowhere. She curled her lips mockingly and said sarcastically, "Your Highness still has the leisure to admire flowers at this time? It's my fault. I didn't protect you well." Wuma Jun said embarrassedly. His face was filled with sadness and pain. Hui Jun's heart skipped a beat. Her face seemed to have been poked. She grabbed a handful of pearls and jade from her hair and threw them at Wuma Jun. She lowered her voice in pain and said angrily, "Wuma Jun, you also know that you didn't protect me well? That day, when I was forced by your father, where were you? These days, I have no choice but to force myself to smile and win his favor. Where are you?" Wuma Jun had originally wanted to test Hui Jun's loyalty, but seeing her reaction, he knew that she still loved him. He was immediately delighted. "I had no choice but to do so, but I feel more disgusted." Hui Jun restrained her anger and recovered her cold and arrogant expression. She was like a volcano that was suppressing her anger and would erupt at any moment. As she narrated, her beautiful eyes couldn't help but tear up. "Your father has one foot in the coffin. Do you know how disgusting I felt when he did those things to me? You're a man, so why can't you protect me?" Wuma Jun's face was filled with embarrassment and pain. He could not help but step forward to hug her and apologize. Hui Jun pushed him away and said in a low, hoarse voice, "From now on, let's go our separate ways. Let's not meet again. You can't do that. How could you be so cruel? You were snatched away by imperial father. Do you think my heart is at ease? But he's the emperor, I can't disobey him." Wuma Jun said through gritted teeth. Any man would not tolerate the humiliation of being cuckolded, even if that person was his father. Hui Jun sneered coldly. She obviously did not believe his words. Believe me. Believe me this once." Wuma Jun kissed her softly and said in a low voice, "I'll think of a way to pull that old man down from the throne. When that time comes, you'll be my empress, and we'll share the world." "How about?" Hui Jun's heart moved. She was obviously persuaded. Wuma Jun took advantage of the situation and pursued her. The two of them simply cuddled in the artificial mountain cave for a while. Wuma Jun's complexion improved a lot after tasting the long-awaited pleasure. After tasting the best delicacies in the world, he felt disgusted when he tasted those vulgar women. They tasted like wax. Hui Jun leisurely tidied up her clothes and asked, "What do you want to do then?" Wuma Jun said, "Don't worry, I already have a foolproof plan. I've already conspired with the emperor. Now that the old man wants to move the capital, it's a good opportunity. There are many mobs on the road, and 100,000 imperial guards are not enough. As long as you think of a way to get him to summon the emperor, we'll work together and succeed." There were at least 20,000 palace maids, eunuchs, concubines, and women with no status in Shangyang Palace. The important officials of the imperial court and their families, as well as the treasures of each residence, had to be taken away. Although the national treasury did not have much silver, the emperor's private treasury was extremely rich. It was not safe to send all these things to the new capital with just 100,000 imperial guards. The emperor? Prince Changsho? But that old man is so suspicious. He won't agree at all. Wuma Jun gritted his teeth and said harshly, then you think of a way. If it really doesn't work, pass a fake imperial edict. I'm afraid that's not good. Only with the emperor's personal edict can the emperor bring his troops out of the fief and help us. For us, you must do it. Hui Jun hid her inner thoughts. Her joy was mixed with greed. I'll give it a try. Does your previous promise still count? Wuma Jun was stunned. He immediately remembered what he had just said and smiled. Of course. Other than you, no one else has the right to be the Empress. Hui Jun saw that he agreed so readily and sneered. If the Empress is given to me, what about the fourth imperial concubine? When she mentioned Lu Huan, Huijuan's eyes were filled with undisguised malice and hatred. Wuma Jun was even more relieved. He coaxed, when she gives birth, you can do whatever you want with her. He was the son of the first wife after all. Wuma Jun naturally valued him. Yes, although Wuma Jun and Lu Huan had only slept together for one night, Lu Huan was still pregnant. Moreover, Lu Huan was Lu Shi's illegitimate daughter. Wuma Jun needed Lu Shi to restrain the 3 tribes of the north borderline. He could not touch Lu Huan yet. As for this promise, it was just a casual promise to appease Hui Jun. Wuma Jun knew that the emperor was very suspicious. He would definitely not summon Prince Changsho from the fief at this time. So he needed absolute help. This must be done as soon as possible. Hui Jun nodded obediently. Okay. After Wuma Jun left sneakily, Hui Jun walked out in the opposite direction. What a stupid man. Hui Jun looked at his back as he left. Her lips curled into a cold smile. Nation-wrecking enchantress? Speaking of which, she seemed to have slacked off recently. The emperor was becoming more and more obedient to her. He allowed her to enter the study and she could even read the memorials handed to her by the officials. When she was unhappy, she could even burn them for fun. Under such circumstances, it was not difficult to get a fake personal edict from the emperor. However, she did not want to let Wuma Jun take advantage of her. It would be best if they could fight each other and not have time to worry about the changes in power in the north. This way, Lang Jun would be safer. Chapter 394. The relocation of the capital was a foregone conclusion. 6 days had passed since the earthquake. Because Jiang Pengji's speed was considered fast and the treatment was timely, no plague was discovered in Shangjing. However, according to the cooks who transported the grain and the troops who provided disaster relief in Fengyi County, signs of plague had been discovered in other areas. Jiang Pengji's hands and feet were covered with medicine. The last day's medicine would be given to the troops and 1,000 imperial guards. She only needed to rest. Host V, I feel like a salted fish. Jiang Pengji's most important task at the moment was to recuperate and heal the injuries on her arms and legs as soon as possible. In the few days since the earthquake, Jiang Pengji did not rest at all. She led the team to work in the search and rescue area, rescuing people who were buried in the ruins one after another. After all, no one could accurately find traces of life like she could. Therefore, her injuries looked a little terrible. Just as the rescue was coming to an end, Feng Jin and the others strongly requested that she stay in the camp to recuperate. In fact, her body's recovery ability was several times that of a normal person. If it wasn't for the fear of scaring the doctor and making him think that she was a monster, she would have been jumping around a long time ago. Jiang Pengji was bored of recuperating, so she decided to chat with the audience. Perhaps the dark clouds of the earthquake had temporarily receded, but the audience in the live stream had also become much livelier. Big Red Date, Trash Streamer, You're a Salted Fish. Poor Su Ku, Feng Jin, and Handsome Qiguan Rang. What are they? The ultimate salted fish that was whipped and enslaved by a salted fish? I haven't seen Handsome Qiguan for a whole day. Host V, Wenzheng has a wife. AI Fengjin Bao Bao, I haven't seen young Fengjin in a long time. The adult Fengjin is so charming. Host V, Huayu has a wife. The elder princess, go away. In terms of handsomeness, I think Su Ku is the best. Host, do you still remember that Su Ku looks very similar to a young and fresh meat here? Let me tell you, Su Ku has a lot of fans now. That little fresh meat had not been doing well in the past 2 years, so he had been trying to ride on Su Ku's popularity. Recently, he had accepted a costume drama and imitated Su Ku's style. Jiang Pengji held the bowl with both hands and blew on it. Then she drank the bitter medicine in one gulp and changed to a more comfortable position. Host V, Xiaoyu has a wife. Huyang Meisho, what's wrong with getting married? I say, you guys are really childish and shallow. Young Fengjin, young Su Ku, and Uncle Qiguan Rang, the three of them are all scholars. Their shoulders are not heavy and their hands are not heavy. If they don't have the intelligence that they are proud of, they feel like useless white chickens. In my opinion, Uncle Meng Han is better. Those muscles of his make me envious. Only when the man was strong and healthy could the husband and wife live harmoniously. Jiang Pengji glanced at the bullet screen. It was as if she could hear the sound of a train passing by. Host V, my wife died. The live stream viewers were speechless. Could they still have a pleasant conversation? Lo Siji Lianmeng, speaking of which, your friends are all married. Why are you still single? How could Jiang Pengji admit defeat? Host V, sigh, aren't I accompanying you guys? Although she was recuperating, Jiang Pengji was not idle. After teasing the audience, Jiang Pengji was in a much better mood. She raised her hand and pulled over the drawing on the short table. This was not the great universal geographical map of Dongqing, but the topographic map of the nearby counties. It was drawn very crudely and could barely be read. At that moment, Fengjin entered the tent. Huayu, how's the counting of the injured outside? Jiang Pengji ate some candied plums to suppress the bitterness in her mouth. The specific number is out. 19,812 people. The number of dead people is impossible to count. It's roughly estimated to be 85,000. Even Fengjin could not help but sigh when he reported the number. Shangjing used to be so prosperous. There were 120,000 people in the city. An earthquake killed 70% of the population. Jiang Pengji calculated and felt that the number was about the same. Even if they conducted a thorough search twice, there was no guarantee that there were no missing people. Jiang Pengji set up a gruel stall and a relief camp in Shangjing. There was no guarantee that no people survived and escaped. The number of people was not far from what she expected. I plan to take up my post in Xiangyang district in 2 days, Jiang Pengji said. So soon? Fengjin was startled. He asked, if that's the case, how are we going to settle the people outside? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, if the people are willing to follow us, then let them follow us. If they feel that it's hard to leave their homeland, everyone can leave some food. That's the most benevolent thing we can do. We have to leave as soon as possible to prevent any accidents from happening. The imperial court remained silent about the earthquake and insisted on moving the capital. How can the people who were abandoned tolerate this? I'm afraid that the people will rise up in revolt. There will be countless mobs on the road. While the situation was not serious, she should take up her post first. With a stable place, Jiang Pengji could think about her next move. Fengjin suddenly revealed a bitter expression. He said, I'm not afraid. It has already happened. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and asked, are there really mobs? Dongqing was a strange country. There had been natural and man-made disasters all these years, but the people's endurance was surprisingly high. If it was Jiang Pengji's temper, she would have risen up in revolt when the imperial court was in turmoil. She would not have tolerated it until now. There are two groups in total. One group calls themselves the Tsing-Yi Army and the other the Red Lotus Group. The two groups rose up in revolt within 2 days of each other. Under the banner of "Heaven is heartless," eliminate tyranny and create great harmony together, plead for the people, they made a big fuss. The troops sent 1,000 don of food to Fengyi County, but it was almost robbed by the Tsing-Yi Army. Even so, we lost a few troops. As soon as Feng Jin finished speaking, Jiang Pengji looked solemn. There was a cracking sound in the air. He looked down and saw Jiang Pengji put one hand on the table and crushed the armrest into powder. Almost robbed the troops of their food? Jiang Pengji sneered. A strong murderous intent brewed in her eyes. Since they raised such a noble banner, do you know that the food sent to Fengyi County is used to help the victims? They even want to rob this? Feng Jin looked at the powder on the ground. He could not imagine how much strength Jiang Pengji had used. However, this also meant that her injury had healed, right? Feng Jin's face showed some sarcasm. What's the use of raising the banner of righteousness? They are just a motley crew without any discipline. In the end, they will only make loud noises and soft noises. They won't be able to stir up much trouble. There seemed to be nothing wrong with what he said, but the audience in the streaming room had a different opinion. Lo Ciji Lianmeng, TSK, I think young Feng Jin has raised a big flag. Thinking back to the Yellow Turban Army in the last years of the Eastern Han Dynasty, who took them seriously in the beginning? In the end, didn't they make a big fuss and shake the entire court? Maishi Zayazilong, young Feng Jin was born into an aristocratic family. He has a fixed impression of ordinary farmers. His judgment is correct. Not only him, but most people in this era think the same way. TSK, they still don't understand the anger of the farmers. Jiang Pengji smiled without saying a word to Feng Jin's words. This time, she was on the side of the audience in the streaming room. Tsing-Yi Army, Red Lotus Group. TSK, the heavens are helping me. Jiang Pengji's eyes flickered slightly. She said, Huayu, don't you think that just being the district magistrate of Xiangyang district doesn't suit my status? Chapter 395. The viewers in the live stream room were the most sarcastic. Maishi Zayazilong, after watching the live stream for so long, I finally understand that the streamer is different from ordinary people. Ordinary people at most eat from their bowls and look at the pot, but the streamer? She hasn't even eaten from her bowl, but she's already thinking about the uncooked food in the pot. She's still thinking about which chicken and duck to slaughter and what to eat for supper. Ingyang Kuaixian, the commenter above put it so tactfully. Can't you just say that the streamer is greedy? Of course, this is a compliment. Lo Ciji Lianmeng, do you think greedy can describe the streamer's nature? There was another round of discussion among the viewers in the live stream room. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes in her heart and then blocked the bullet screen. If it was an ordinary person, they would probably be frightened by Jiang Pengji's words. Feng Jin was not an ordinary person. He could actually understand Jiang Pengji's strange thinking. He adjusted his mentality and muttered to himself for a while. Lanting, what you mean by this? You want Fengyi County? From the map of Dongqing, Dongqing had 6 prefectures and a total of 21 counties. The 6 prefectures were Cangzhou, Chongzhou, Zhangzhou, Wanzhou, Chenzhou, and Haozhou. Wanzhou included Shangyang County, Fengyi County, and Chengde County. Among the 3 counties, Fengyi County had the largest area. However, it was located in the north and had the least population. Xiangyang County, where Jiang Pengji was about to be appointed, was in Fengyi County. Jiang Pengji revealed a smile of determination and asked him in reply, why not? Feng Jin said, It's not that I want to pour cold water on you, but the emperor won't allow this. Lu Shi was already the magistrate of Chongzhou. Before he retired, Lu Shi could at most be the district magistrate of Xiangyang County. He would not be able to climb any higher. The emperor was suspicious. He even guarded against his own son and even monitored him day and night, let alone Lu Shi and his son. When did I say I needed his permission? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, Huayu is still too much of a gentleman. Feng Jin, who was labeled as a gentleman, was silent. The gentleman that came out of his mouth was definitely not a compliment. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, the earthquake affected the entire Wanzhou, and the emperor insisted on moving the capital to Chenzhou. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline are also eyeing the northern border covetously. In other words, the northern part of Dongqing is in a rather chaotic state, and the imperial court has no time to attend to other matters. Huayu, in such a situation, do you think the appointment letter from the imperial court is more useful, or do you think a powerful troop is easier to talk to? In this chaotic world, only strength was the best life-saving trump card. Previously, they had always taken the route of elite soldiers, so the number of troops had been reduced again and again. Now that the world was in chaos, Jiang Pengji had to consider expanding the troops. Feng Jin understood what Jiang Pengji meant. As long as they had a strong army and strong horses, they could control the entire Fengyi County by force. That would be a success. By then, even if Jiang Pengji was still the magistrate of Xiangyang district, in essence, she was no different from the county chief. Jiang Pengji had never been to Xiangyang district, but she had read extensively. Xiangyang district was mentioned in some geographical records and history books, so she knew a little about the specific situation there. Xiangyang district is a good place to train troops. The terrain is easy to defend and hard to attack. Feng Jin was from Xiangyang County. Xiangyang County was adjacent to Fengyi County, so he had some understanding of Xiangyang district in Fengyi County. He frowned and his expression was solemn. It's true that the land here is vast, but it's a barren place. It's sparsely populated and the terrain is steep. It's not conducive to farming. It wasn't easy to feed the troops. One person was one mouth. In addition to daily training, a person's appetite was twice that of a normal man. The food consumption was huge. The land in Xiangyang district was barren and there were few farmers. The food produced was not enough to feed the troops. In other words, if she were to station troops here, she would need to spend a huge amount of money to buy food from outside every year. Could her assets afford it? This was a troop of 5,000 people. If she wanted to expand, the expenditure would skyrocket. Huayu, you have to understand something. Jiang Pengji crossed her arms in front of her chest and smiled confidently. If a place is poor, you can't blame the lack of resources. You can only blame the people who manage the place for being too stupid. They only know how to look at their disadvantages and don't make use of their advantages. Jiang Pengji's words could be considered as a broadside. Come, come, come. I'll show you a treasure. Jiang Pengji rummaged through her book box and took out a roll of slightly yellowed sheepskin. She unfolded it and gestured for Feng Jin to come over and take a look. Sometimes, it's definitely not bad to read more. Feng Jin took 2 steps forward and sat on the side of the desk again. He carefully looked at the unfolded sheepskin. There was still a slight odor in the air. This is Dongqing's Universal Geographical Map. Feng Jin examined it carefully and discovered that it was indeed the Great Universal Geographical Map of Dongqing. However, the things drawn on it were far more detailed than the Great Universal Geographical Map that he knew of. Not only were there many more river branches and mountain lines, but there were also many strange symbols. Yes, it's indeed Dongqing's Universal Geographical Map. Jiang Pengji said, Master Cheng Cheng's book collection is all-encompassing and covers almost all aspects of content. The Langi Academy is also extraordinary. There are many incomplete ancient books and only copies. I collated all the geographical records and related unofficial history and official history. Then, I copied the universal geographical map and made these markings on it. It took a lot of effort. Feng Jin was a little confused at first. When he found that there were symbols at the corner of the map and there were annotations beside the symbols, he was suddenly enlightened. After understanding the meaning of each symbol, it was much easier to look at the universal geographical map again. This. Feng Jin was so shocked that he could hardly speak. Various mineral veins were marked on the universal geographical map. How do you know all this? Feng Jin found his voice after a long while. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes and said, "Reading more is good for your physical and mental health. There will be unexpected gains if you write more reading notes." Before the 16 kingdoms, the people were valiant and free. Many scholars traveled the world and compiled what they saw and heard along the way into books. Later, after the War of the 16 Kingdoms, most of these books were lost or incomplete. Some even only had one copy passed down. She sorted out Cheng Cheng's book collection. There were many related books, but most people treated them as travel biographies and did not pay much attention to them. During the 2 or 3 years in Langi County, Jiang Pengji did not stay idle. She thought of ways to read many precious, only copies. Although the universal geographical map was simple, it took her 3 years of painstaking effort. Feng Jin still did not understand. Jiang Pengji said again, "It's like a tour of the mountains and rivers written by a great scholar of the previous dynasty. Ordinary people can only read the magnificent mountains and rivers described in the book and the interesting things that happened to the great scholar during his journey, but I read something else." She used her finger to point at the universal geographical map on the table. Her fingertips moved from one point to another. This was the travel route of the great scholar. Feng Jin took a look and saw that the route was marked with many small words. When he looked carefully, his scalp went numb. For example, the great scholar said that he saw a magnificent scene somewhere. It was so beautiful that it did not seem like a scene of the human world. Jiang Pengji analyzed the reason for the formation of the scene and studied other similar geographical biographies. She combined a series of conditions such as the mountains, soil, temperature, humidity, and the time at that time to infer the unique terrain or geological situation in the vicinity. Chapter 396. Ah, the future lord is so awesome, does she still need a salted fish strategist? As a normal person, in Jiang Pengji's words, Feng Jin felt that he had suffered tens of thousands of points of damage. The nerves in the corners of his mouth seemed to be out of control. If it wasn't for his good upbringing, he might have already lost his composure. So you see, according to my initial conjecture, Xiangyang district is not without merit. It all depends on how it is used and developed. Jiang Pengji said, but these are ultimately my personal conjectures. I still have to personally go to Xiangyang district to know the actual situation. After listening, Feng Jin looked at the map and then at Jiang Pengji. He suddenly understood that no matter where she was thrown to, she would cause trouble. According to my experience, Xiangyang district should have an iron mine with medium reserves. If it is mined, swords, spears, and armor were essential equipment for elite troops. It was also the biggest expenditure. Jiang Pengji was very poor now. She could barely provide food for the troops. Providing 100 or 200 sets of elite weapons was a stretch, not to mention equipping the entire troop. But, even if there is an iron mine and it can be mined, how do we transport it out? Feng Jin was not a person who liked to bicker, but his companion was really asking for a beating that day. It made his hands itch. He couldn't help it. If she was that capable, why not just go to heaven? I heard some people say that if you want to be rich, you have to build roads first. Have fewer children and plant more trees. Bah, you don't have to care about the last sentence. Jiang Pengji blurted out the teasing of the audience in the streaming room. She said seriously, the main point is in the first sentence. The prosperity of any place is inseparable from roads that extend in all directions. The soil in Xiangyang district is not soft. If we build a road that leads to the outside world, it will save a lot of inconvenience. As for the money, food, and manpower needed to build the road, we don't have to worry too much. Forced labor? Feng Jin frowned. Since ancient times, the people hated forced labor, but the court's orders had to be carried out. Forced labor, in plain words, was unpaid manual labor. There was no reward for doing it well, but the whole family would die if it was not done well. If Jiang Pengji did it as soon as she took office, it would easily cause disgust and conflict among the local people. That's why I said that Huayu is too much of a gentleman. Some things need to be flexible. It's not good to stick to the rules. Jiang Pengji said, ordinary forced labor, the people are afraid to avoid it. Why do you ask? Wasn't it heavy labor without pay? Not only did it waste time, but it also delayed the family's farming. If we give the people a certain amount of rewards, take care of their food and clothing, and when the construction is completed in the future, each household will be able to reduce their agricultural taxes according to their discretion, or rent farming tools and cattle from the government at a low price, would anyone be unwilling? Where is the money? Feng Jin couldn't help but be vulgar and step on the crux of the problem. Jiang Pengji made a good point. However, they still needed to return to the essence of the matter, money. Where would the money come from? She exclaimed and shouted towards the outside, "Is Xiaoyu around? Come here for a moment." Not long after, Su Ku, who was so busy that he felt dizzy, came in. The temperature and smell inside the tent were more comfortable than outside. "What's the matter, Lang Jun?" Jiang Pengji said, "Have the troops who were sent to search the ruins of the various residences returned? What's the result?" Feng Jin immediately understood and his face turned green. Where would the money come from? He borrowed them directly from the ruins. She would write an IOU. When the day came when she had money, she would return it to the victim. However, this suggestion was made by himself, so Feng Jin could only bite the bullet and swallow it. Before the earthquake, many high-ranking officials and nobles were out of the city to avoid the heat, so most of the casualties were manservants. When the earthquake happened, the government intended to move the capital. Some families urgently sent manservants back with jewelry, luggage, and family property. Time was tight, so there were not many things that could be taken away. The rest almost benefited Jiang Pengji. Hearing her mention this, Su Ku's face became ruddy. He took out a list from his sleeve, on which there was a list of treasures. Those high-ranking officials didn't have time for such things, but Jiang Pengji's troops had time. They took away everything that could be taken away. When they came, every troop came empty-handed. When they left, every troop had bags full. Jiang Pengji said, "Look, don't we have the money now?" Feng Jin was speechless. He just wanted some peace and quiet. She didn't want to talk to him. Jiang Pengji didn't tease the poor Feng Jin anymore. She knew when to stop. Let's first count how many people are willing to follow us. Time waits for no one. Jiang Pengji had just finished speaking when she suddenly thought of something. Right, get someone to dress up as an ordinary person and spread the news about the Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus group. The audience in the streaming room didn't understand why Jiang Pengji did this, but Feng Jin and Su Ku understood instantly. Most of the people nowadays had some feelings of reluctance to leave their homeland. Even if they had lost their homes and the court didn't care about them, many people were still willing to blindly stay where they were instead of following an unfamiliar force to a stranger place to start anew. Jiang Pengji wasn't sure how many of the more than 10,000 people would be willing to follow her, so she simply used a little trick. If they followed her, they wouldn't have meat to eat every meal, but at least they could have warm porridge for 3 meals. Their lives wouldn't be in danger. If they stayed where they were or sought refuge with other relatives, just the mobs on the road would make them die without a complete corpse. Although the reaction arc was a little slow, the audience in the streaming room was still very quick-witted. Many people praised Jiang Pengji's shamelessness. Chow Laoru's wife, I don't even help my second brother when I go to the toilet. I'll give it to you. De sell straw shoes, seeing that the streamer is so shameless, I'm suddenly relieved. Thinking about the romance of the 3 kingdoms, when Uncle Lu was defeated, he couldn't bear to leave the 100,000 people in Xinya. It was said that the people voluntarily dragged their families to follow him. After watching the streamer, I suddenly started to have conspiracy theories. Gu Wu de Dao, I've never seen such a shameless person. She's so shameless that she's righteous, but I just like her. Jiang Pengji looked at the bullet screen and secretly rolled her eyes. Didn't they know that she was in need of manpower and money now? If she didn't think of ways to increase income and reduce expenditure, how could she spread such a big business? In fact, the people had a very good impression of Jiang Pengji. Many even respected her from the bottom of their hearts. How many people had been personally rescued from the ruins by her? They were able to live, not because the court was kind and loved the people like their own children, but because of the youth's benevolent heart. The grace of saving their lives was like giving them a new lease on life. When the news that Jiang Pengji was preparing to depart for Xiangyang district spread, and they heard that there were mobs on the road, such as the Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus group. They were not decent organizations. Many people were anxious and miserable, afraid that she would leave them behind. Staying in Shangjing meant death. Why not think of a way to fight and start afresh in a new place? At least their days would not be as difficult as they were now. Most of the young people were willing to follow, but it was difficult for the elderly and children. They could not walk fast and would instead be a burden. Don't worry, old people. Those who want to leave can leave. Lang Jun won't leave any people behind. Chapter 397. In less than 2 hours, the news that Jiang Pengji was about to bring people to Xiangyang district spread throughout the camp. Considering that some of the people were seriously injured and could not travel normally, Jiang Pengji deliberately delayed it for a few days. She waited for their injuries to recover before they set off, so that the people could recuperate in peace. The troops and imperial guards who were free were transferred elsewhere to continue to shine. Such a considerate act made many people weep, and it also won Jiang Pengji a good reputation. Some of the people who had wavered even made up their minds and were willing to leave Shangjing with Jiang Pengji. Luoyue? Why are you looking for me? Jiang Pengji was sitting in the tent. She used her right hand to pull off the white dead skin hanging from the sole of her left foot. Her hands and feet were seriously injured when she rescued the people. Fortunately, she had a strong recovery ability, and the soles of her feet were white again. However, her injuries were healed, but the newly grown skin rubbed against the dead skin, making her feel very itchy. Anyway, she was bored and there was no one else in the tent. She might as well pick at the dead skin while chatting with the audience in the streaming room. Well, the audience said that today's streaming had a special flavor. A second ago, the audience in the streaming room was teasing her for not having a good image. They did not expect that someone would really come in the next second. According to Jiang Pengji's 5 senses, she naturally knew that Luoyue was coming. She did not look embarrassed when she was caught. She looked natural and pointed to the mat not far away. She put down her left foot and gestured for Luoyue to take a seat. Coach Luoyue, if you have something to say, don't hesitate. Luoyue was also a rough man. Living in the Imperial Guards camp, he had seen all kinds of scenes. Jiang Pengji was only quietly picking at the dead skin on the soles of her feet. She was considered polite. He had even seen the chief coach of the Imperial Guards pick at his feet and rub the mud off his skin, so he was very calm. I heard that Lu Langjun is preparing to take up the post in Xiangyang district. Luoyue asked directly. Jiang Pengji frowned. She knew the reason for Luoyue's visit. 1,000 Imperial Guards were also a military force. No matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. Not to mention that the 1,000 Imperial Guards were all young and strong men who were carefully selected. Jiang Pengji had no intention of letting them go. Even if Luoyue wanted to leave, she would not agree. She sighed and replied, "It's true. Shangjing is in a mess now. It won't be easy to rebuild it. I heard that the Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus group are going to harm the people. If these people were left alone, it would be difficult for them to survive. However, the earthquake involved many people. Not only did Shangjing suffer, but even Fengyi County and Qingde County were severely affected. There were also mobs on the road." Luoyue looked straight at Jiang Pengji and listened to her quietly. As a young instructor of the Imperial Army, Luoyue had the right to be arrogant. However, he was also a reasonable person who respected those worthy of respect. Undoubtedly, no one could find any fault with Jiang Pengji's actions these days. Lu Langjun is worried about the people and intends to protect them to Xiangyang district of Fengyi County. If we don't do this and leave them be, their life and death will be up to the heavens? Jiang Pengji asked naturally. I admire Sir Lu's benevolence. However, there's something that I don't know if I should say. Jiang Pengji said, Coach Luo, please speak your mind. There are only 1,000 troops under Sir Lu's command. The rest of the troops are in Fengyi County for disaster relief. How can such a small number of people protect tens of thousands of people? Luoyue asked worriedly, why don't you ask the emperor and let the emperor decide? Jiang Pengji smiled and said sarcastically, Coach Luo, do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know? Let's not talk about anything else. Even the 1,000 Imperial Guards that Instructor Luo brought with him, I had to be thick-skinned to ask for them. Otherwise, you would be preparing to protect the emperor and move the capital to Qinzhou. Her words were rather rude. Luoyue's expression changed slightly. Without waiting for him to speak, Jiang Pengji said, Coach Luo, there's something you're wrong about. It's not 1,000 troops. Isn't there 1,000 imperial soldiers that you brought? Instructor Luo, have you forgotten why the government allocated 1,000 imperial guards? Luoyue's expression was awkward. But, the earthquake has yet to end. The people have yet to truly settle down. There's even a plague spreading in Fengyi County. The people are destitute and homeless. The rebels are running amok and looting. All these things happened because of the earthquake. Do you think that the earthquake is over? After a long time, Luoyue cupped his hands in front of his chest in shame. He said that he still had something to do and left the tent. Jiang Pengji curled her lips. She was in a good mood. Luoyue had boarded her pirate ship. He could forget about bringing anyone else down. After a while, the tent door was opened again. Someone came in. The person held a feather fan in his hand. He had wide sleeves and a silk scarf. When he walked, he had an elegant demeanor and displayed the charm of a scholar. As soon as he came in, he said, according to Lanting, Coach Luo can't go back. Go back for what? There's still a shortage of people here. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes in annoyance. Qiguan Rang sighed. Lanting is the only one who can say such a bandit's words so confidently and confidently. Jiang Pengji glanced at him and said, Why are you here? Are you here to ridicule me? Of course not, Qiguan Rang said, I have nothing to do. I borrowed a few books from you to read to pass the time. Having a godly teammate was a relief. Qiguan Rang was not someone who liked to stand out. He usually kept a low profile when he did things. Most of the work was delegated to Su Ku and Feng Jin. Damn it. He had half a day of leisure in his life. He would slack off if he could. Jiang Pengji glanced at him and suddenly said, "I remember that you got a daughter last year." Qiguan Rang's wife was Wei Yuan's illegitimate daughter, Qiguan Weishi. She was young. They were a standard uncle and lowly match. After Qiguan Weishi married him, she only got pregnant after 2 years. She gave birth to her first child after much difficulty. She was a daughter like Feng Jin. Although she was a daughter, Qiguan Rang liked her very much. He mentioned it several times when he was communicating with Jiang Pengji. Qiguan Rang frowned in his heart. He did not understand why Jiang Pengji suddenly mentioned this. He answered, "Yes." Jiang Pengji suddenly revealed a malicious smile and said, "Here, I'll show you something good. Study it when you go back." Qiguan Rang's heart skipped a beat. He saw Jiang Pengji take out 4 books from nowhere. This is a daughter's elementary reading material. It's enough for you to pass the time. He took a look. The first book was The Analects of Women. Qiguan Rang was strangely silent. Jiang Pengji added, "Remember to show it to Huayu after you finish reading it." He kept the books in his sleeves, but his eyes were still a little conflicted. A man can't just be a father-in-law in this life. He can also be a father-in-law. Jiang Pengji smiled and showed her teeth. She did not have the demeanor of a young master from an aristocratic family. Just like you and Huayu. You have a daughter and you will have half a son in the future. Read more so that you can be mentally prepared in the future. Qiguan Rang knew that Jiang Pengji did not have good intentions, but he still read it when he went back. He felt that he was tricked and almost tore the 4 books apart. He turned his head and lent the 4 books to Feng Jin to read. He said that he could read it to the children. Feng Jin saw that it was the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women. He suddenly remembered the conversation he had with his wife. "Thank you, Wenjing. I was thinking of finding 2 books for Changsheng to read." Qiguan Rang looked at him as if he was looking at a fool and left silently. Feng Jin was puzzled. He packed up and returned to the carriage. Chapter 398. Zhao Village was a small mountain village at the border of Hejian County. The village was very small. A shout at the entrance of the village could be heard clearly at the end of the village. There were only 25 families in the village. If something big happened to any family, the news would spread throughout the village within an hour. In the past 6 months, the liveliest thing in the village was that Widow Zhao had picked up a wolf girl who didn't speak the human language. According to the analysis of the villagers, the wolf girl had been taken away by a female wolf who had lost her child when she was young and raised as her own child. Therefore, the wolf girl was very aggressive. She scratched whoever she caught. She didn't understand the human language, let alone speak it. At first, the villagers were very worried that the wolf girl would bring disaster to the village. However, half a year had passed and nothing had happened. Not only was everything fine, but the wolf girl's hunting skills were top-notch. She could go deep into the mountains to hunt every few days. The hunters in the village only dared to wander around the periphery. The wolf girl dared to go deep into the mountains and hunt every time. Widow Zhao had lost her husband at a young age. It was difficult for a woman to live alone. Ever since she picked up the wolf girl, she ate meat for every meal. She could even use wild eggs to put on her face. The wolf girl was a taciturn person. She ignored everyone and didn't talk to anyone. She looked at people as if they were dead. The villagers were afraid of her. Widow Zhao, on the other hand, knew how to conduct herself. When the wolf girl returned from hunting, she would always give some good things to the families. Today, the wolf girl hunted 2 big wild boars and came back. She didn't blush or pant along the way. She walked as if she was flying. Without looking sideways, the wolf girl carried the 2 big wild boars into Widow Zhao's courtyard and closed the fence. Yao, you're back. Wash your hands and face quickly. Come and try on your new clothes. When Widow Zhao heard the commotion outside, she knew who had returned. My name is not Yao, the wolf girl crossed her arms and leaned against the door. She frowned and looked unhappy. She didn't like the way Widow Zhao addressed her. Compared to Widow Zhao's fluent pronunciation, the wolf girl's pronunciation was very strange. It was like a child learning to speak. The wolf girl, or Jiangpengji, had been in this strange, barbaric, and backward world for a whole year. For the first half of the year, she basically lived in the mountains. She knew that she had come to a completely strange barbaric era. What was worse was that she couldn't speak the language of these backward humans. She was unable to communicate verbally, which meant that she couldn't quickly integrate into this society, let alone get the information she needed. Knowing Widow Zhao and being picked up by her was a complete accident. Jiang Pengji inexplicably became the so-called wolf girl. While she was envied and feared by the villagers, she was also envied. Towards the filthy thoughts of these ancient humans, she only sneered coldly, feeling extremely disgusted with conversing with them. Widow Zhao, on the other hand, mediated between the two so that she could continue living in the village. Widow Zhao was an enthusiastic person. She pulled her to make a comparison of the new clothes. I see that you've been hunting in the mountains all day. You should at least change into a set of clean and light clothes. Don't be shy. Let me have a look. Jiang Pengji secretly rolled her eyes. She took the green robes and went to her room. What about the pigs in the yard? I'll go kill them later. If the villagers want to buy it, sell it at a cheaper price. If you can't sell it, make it into dried meat. Jiang Pengji's voice was low and hoarse. It didn't sound like a girl's voice, but she was a real girl. Widow Zhao thought that such peaceful days would continue. If she saved for another 2 years, she would be able to gather a dowry for her youngest child and find a matchmaker to arrange a good marriage for her youngest child. Who knew that something unexpected would happen? That day, Jiang Pengji went hunting in the mountains as usual. She had a bountiful harvest. Just as she walked out of the forest, she saw an old man with a walking stick waiting outside. It was the village's Li Zheng. She had always been gentle towards the elderly and young children. Li Zheng, are you looking for me? Looking at his posture, something big must have happened. Jiang Pengji frowned. She had an ominous premonition. When Li Zheng saw her come out, he evaded her gaze. Youngest child, something happened to Widow Zhao. Quickly go back and take a look. Jiang Pengji understood what he meant. She hurriedly put down the wild game in her hands and returned to Widow Zhao's house as fast as she could. The fisherman who fished out the body said that Widow Zhao had fallen into the water and drowned. However, when Jiang Pengji looked at her body, she discovered that she had been strangled to death and thrown into the water. She had even been ravaged by at least 3 men before her death. Who was she trying to fool with such obvious marks? Jiang Pengji's expression was so grave that it could drip water. However, the people around her said that she was an untamed wolf. Widow Zhao had treated her so well. Now that she was dead, she didn't even cry. She was simply an ingrate. Jiang Pengji understood what he meant, but she found it ridiculous. Wasn't the best way to answer to the wrongly dead to prove her innocence? Cry. What was the use of crying? Using the excuse of keeping watch at night, Jiang Pengji carefully examined Widow Zhao's body and found a few key clues. She had endured it for a few days. After Widow Zhao's burial, she left Zhao village that night. After half a month of careful investigation, she locked onto 4 suspects. Given that the 4 of them had high social statuses and had attendants wherever they went, Jiang Pengji chose to assassinate them. When she killed the 4th person, there was a small problem. Lu Lanting, you be ****. You actually killed your illegitimate brother with your own hands? Lu she pointed at Jiang Pengji with a trembling finger. He was half sober. His eye bags were dark, and his footsteps were weak. It was obvious that he had been drained by alcohol and women. Jiang Pengji didn't like to kill innocent people. She came and went without a trace, so she wasn't afraid that Lu she would see her face. What Lu Lanting? She asked in a hoarse voice with a cold face. What illegitimate brother? Lu she looked at her in disbelief. Then, he looked at the lifeless body on the ground. While he was devastated, he was also furious. Be ****, if I don't kill you today, I won't be able to avenge my son. When Lu Shi was young, he was a famous playboy in Hejin. He was addicted to alcohol and women all day long. He had many wives and concubines in his backyard. He kidnapped countless women and killed even more. Perhaps it was retribution. After they got married, they only had 2 sons of concubines and a daughter of the first wife. One son of the concubine died young, and the other son of the second wife, who survived with great difficulty, became a golden lump. He and his concubine spoiled him to the point of lawlessness, and often did evil things to the common women. Both father and son were not good people, and they had many debts of human lives. As for the illegitimate daughter, she fell into the bandits' lair a year ago. It was said that she was no longer innocent. He felt ashamed, so he simply declared that she was dead and didn't send anyone to look for her. Unexpectedly, she came back a year later and took her illegitimate brother's life. Jiang Pengji frowned. She had a good memory. On the first day she came to this world, she saved a group of girls who were being bullied by bandits. When those girls called her, they did pronounce her name, Lanting. Could it be the name of the original owner of this body? I don't know who Lanting is. I only know that the B***** lying on the ground and the other 3 B****s killed the most important person to me in this world. He committed a crime. According to the federal law, rape and murder are capital crimes. Jiang Pengji jumped onto the eaves and used her right hand to grab a stone from the cloth bag around her waist. She hit Lu Shi and knocked him out. After that, she re-entered the forest and lived a carefree life like a savage. If there were no accidents, it would have been a good life. Unfortunately, her neighbors were the bandits who came looking for trouble. Jiang Pengji single-handedly challenged the entire bandit village. Although she didn't kill anyone, every bandit was injured. The lightest injury was a fracture. After witnessing Jiang Pengji's ruthlessness, all the bandits were afraid of her. Who owns this mountain? It's yours, my queen. Who has the final say on this mountain? My queen, you have the final say. Very well. From now on, this is my territory. Who should you listen to? We'll listen to you, my queen. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.